Chapter 575. The expansion of the four directorates was, in fact, a subdivision of the authority of the various departments under the Directorate General. This was to satisfy the increasingly arduous, complex, and difficult problems of the territory's government affairs. When conditions permit, the various divisions will be upgraded to directorates. Other than the Science, Education, Civil, and Defense Department and the War Preparedness Department that had already been upgraded, 3 more departments are going to be upgraded. The first was to upgrade the Merit Examination Department under the Administrative Department to the Administrative Department of Personnel. The administration of appointments was similar to the Ministry of Appointments of the 6 ministries in ancient times. It consisted of the Ministry of Appointments, the Seal Department, the Meritorious Department, and the Examination Department. They were in charge of the appointment, dismissal, examination, promotion, conferment, and transfer of civil officials in the territory. Ouyang Shuo chose Zhang Tingyu as the first chief of the Administrative Bureau. The memorial system that Zhang Tingyu was previously in charge of had been completed and officially put into operation. After a small test, this number 1 Han official of the Qing dynasty would be able to display his outstanding talents in an even more important post. In addition to serving as the director of the administration of personnel, Zhang Tingyu will also serve as the deputy director of the administration of administration, which means that he will also have a certain say in other government affairs of the administration of administration. Even Su Zhe, the head of the Department of Science and Education, did not receive such an honor. Zhang Tingyu became the second most powerful person in the administrative department, second only to Xiao He. This showed how highly Ouyang Shuo regarded Zhang Tingyu. The former head of the Merit Examination Department, Qin Shijian, would continue to serve as the head of the Merit Examination Department of the Administration of Personnel. Although Qin Shijian's performance in the examination office wasn't too eye-catching, he was still diligent and conscientious. In particular, he had assisted the 2 chief administrative officers to reorganize the governance of the territory. His methods were also very tough. As a result, Qin Shijian had accumulated a wealth of experience in the evaluation of civil officials. By placing Qin Shijian in the examination hall, it showed that Ouyang Shuo approved of him. The second was to upgrade the supervisory department under the Internal Affairs Administration to the supervisory department. The authority of the inspectorate was similar to that of the imperial censorate or the imperial censorate in ancient times. It was in charge of supervising, impeaching, and making suggestions. At the same time, he was given a right to hear major cases. It was obvious that the newly upgraded Inspectorate Bureau had more power and responsibilities than before. The future Internal Affairs Bureau would combine the ancient imperial censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and the Supreme Court into one. The director of the Internal Affairs Department was the Minister of Justice of the territory. The former Director General of the Monitoring Department, Jing Jian, would continue to be in charge of the Monitoring Bureau. As an official, Jing Jian was impartial and incorruptible. Moreover, he dared to speak his mind and was the best candidate for the position of imperial censor. He had the decisiveness of a martial artist and the wisdom of a civil official. He could be said to be an all-rounder. Only in this way could he be in charge of a vital organization like the Inspectorate. As for his personal relationship with the director of the Internal Affairs Department, Wei Yang, Ouyang Shuo believed that it would not affect Director Jing's rational judgment on government affairs and that he would only listen to Wei Yang. The third was to upgrade the Industry Department under the General Administration of Finance to the Industry and Development Planning Department. Ouyang Shuo had previously revealed to Yingyu that he was going to raise the status of the Industrial Division. This adjustment was to fulfill his previous promise. The Industry and Development Planning Department was responsible for industrial planning, investment, and regulation in the territory. It was a modern organization different from the ancient government offices, and it was also the core organization in charge of the territory's industries. The industrialization strategy of the territory would be led and implemented by the Industrial and Development Planning Department. The Protectorate's industrial-related functions would all be merged into this bureau to avoid overlapping powers. Without a doubt, Yingyu would continue to be in charge of this department. The three bureaus that had just been upgraded were the core organizations of the four directorates. After adjusting these three second-level bureaus, the administrative efficiency of the Protectorate of Southern Border would at least double. As for the other bureaus, Ouyang Shua did not adjust them in one go. The main problem was the lack of independent civil officials. In the future, Ouyang Shua would upgrade the various bureaus according to the needs. The third was the appointment and dismissal of related personnel. This restructuring of the organization involved more than 100 civil officials. The main basis was the recently concluded inspection of the civil officials of the territory. In the Protectorate, some incompetent civil officials would be sent to the local counties to gain experience. Similarly, some outstanding civil officials would be transferred to the central government of the territory. This would also help the central government and the local civil officials to communicate in an orderly manner. The reason for the delay in announcing this adjustment was to complete the relevant personnel arrangements. At this point, the adjustment of the entire organization came to an end. Only after completing the adjustment of the organization would Ouyang Shua have the confidence to solidify the territory's foundation in the first half of the third year of Gaia. While Shanghai City was busy adjusting the structure of the territory, the China region was not peaceful. The most lively region was the Central Plains. Just as Ouyang Shua expected, Lord Chunshin was unwilling to accept defeat. He wanted to give it his all before winter arrived. He wanted to uproot Zhang Chu's regime, which was still in a stalemate. On the day the auction ended, Lord Chunshin spent another 1,000,000 gold coins to recruit soldiers in the various great cities. In total, he hired more than 100,000 adventure-type mercenaries. His intentions were self-evident. Soon, winter was approaching in the north. The war in the Central Plains was in a stalemate. Gaia's limited-time exchange had become Lord Chunshin's last straw. Lord Chunshin wanted to fight with his back to the wall. Before winter truly arrived, he would strike a shocking blow against Zhang Chu. Gaia's third year, 5th day of the first month, Central Plains Province. Lord Chunshin's top general, Tian Dan, led a coalition army of 150,000 mercenaries. In addition to the scattering beans commander seal that Lord Chunshin had just won, a total of 300,000 soldiers suddenly launched a fierce attack on Zhang Chu's southern army. This time, Zhang Chu was caught off guard. Originally, they had already made preparations for a winter break. Who would have thought that at this time, the enemy would launch a fierce attack and increase the number of soldiers by 150,000? In just one day, the Southern Army's position was broken through by the Allied army. The army was routed and fled. Seeing this, Tian Dan led his troops to pursue and attack. The vanguard of his troops headed straight for Zhang Chu's capital, Chun County. In an instant, the capital was in a state of emergency. In a panic, Chun Sheng had no choice but to transfer the troops stationed in the north back to Chun County. Emperor Qin's troops stationed at Zhang Chu's northern border saw this and brazenly attacked. Taking advantage of the situation, they officially declared war on Zhang Chu. 100,000-strong army in the north of Zhang Chu set off waves of smoke. At the same time, the Wandering Illusion Division in the west also changed from a passive defense to an active attack. The three great armies clearly had a tacit understanding. This operation was the result of the internal coordination of the Yan-Huang alliance. In the face of success and failure, they finally put aside their differences and began to work together. As a result, Zhang Chu's regime was attacked on three sides. It was in dire straits. It looked like the last rebel army group was going to be completely annihilated in this winter. Chapter 576. It's snowing. Ouyang Shua stood under the eaves and looked into the distance. Lianzhou Basin was as warm as spring all year round, but snowflakes were falling from the sky, which was rare. The fluttering snowflakes decorated Shanghai City, making it look even more enchanting and enchanting. To the people of Lianzhou, who had never seen snow since they were born, this snow was undoubtedly the best gift from God. It was the warmest New Year's gift in this winter. The whole city fell into a fanaticism for snow. The streets and alleys were filled with children having snowball fights. Even the adults could not help but join in the fun. At the corners, there were lifelike snowmen, which decorated Shanghai City in a unique way. Not only Lianzhou Basin, but the entire China region was covered in snow. The harsh climate of the wilderness, which had been condensed during the winter, finally reached its peak at this moment. The red clouds that had been drifting without dispersing had magically dispersed overnight, turning into a heavy snowfall. The gorgeous red had turned into a clean white. The heavy snowfall spread from the south to the north, getting heavier and thicker. In the second year of Gaia, the bloodstains, broken limbs, and wreckage that had been left behind in the wilderness for an entire year were all covered by this sudden snowfall, no longer existing in the world. As far as the eye could see, there was only endless whiteness left between heaven and earth. The vast expanse of whiteness covered all the ugliness of the world. The world seemed to have returned to peace and prosperity. The entire wilderness stopped fighting at the same time, welcoming the arrival of the Lunar New Year. Even the Central Plains, which had just been stirred up, regained its rare tranquility. The cold winter, the irresistible cold, had officially arrived in the north. Under the joint attack of Lord Chunxin, Di Chun, and Wandering Huan, Chunshang Zhang Chu finally could not hold on and was beaten back. The defeat of the Southern Army triggered the collapse of Zhang Chu's front line. As the saying goes, pull one hair and the whole body moves. In just 1 week, Zhang Chu's territory had been lost. In the later stages of the war, even the Phoenix Division, which had been observing from the sidelines, could not help but lead their troops to attack the weakened Zhang Chu. No one had expected that a new regime in the wilderness would be so vulnerable. If not for Xiang Yu, the hegemon king of Western Shu, personally leading his troops to Chun County at the last moment, Chun County would not have survived. It was likely that Chun Sheng would not even be able to protect his capital city. It would be destroyed along with his empire. It was reported that Chun Sheng fell ill as soon as the battle ended. In this cold winter, Zhang Chu was struggling at death's door. In the end, the 4 rebel army groups were unable to escape this calamity and fell under the blade of the overlord players. On the other hand, Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed when he heard the news. Xiang Yu's purpose of leading his troops to aid Qin County was not simple. In the 3rd year of Gaia, how would the hegemon of Western Shu amaze the world? Before the first wave subsided, another wave would rise. Ouyang Shua already had a premonition that a new king would soon stand tall in the Central Plains. The losers of this great war in the Central Plains were certainly miserable, but the victors were not too happy either. As soon as the battle ended, the 4 armies that had been working together were on guard against each other. Everything was for profit. After taking down the Central Plains province, how to divide this tempting cake was a matter of great knowledge. Logically speaking, Lord Chunxin had spent nearly 2 million in this war and should have been the biggest winner. Unfortunately, Lord Chunxin's Danyang city was too far away from the Central Plains province. It was beyond his reach. Moreover, whether it was Lord Chunxin's 100,000 mercenaries or the 50,000 elite soldiers summoned by scattering beans to form army talismans, they were all a thing of the past. Lord Chunxin's troops did not have the advantage in terms of military strength after the war. Instead, the Phoenix Division, which had been biding its time, became the strongest. If not for Di Chun and the others' resistance, Feng Xiuhuang would have become the biggest fisherman. After all, fallen Phoenix City was not far from the Central Plains province. In this cold winter, the 4 powers were destined to engage in a game and negotiation that was even more complicated and difficult than a war. Population, resources, territory, surrendered soldiers, and everything else became the focus of the 4 powers. In particular, population had become the focus of contention. Whether it was Lord Chunxin, Di Chun, or even Piaoling Huan, their territories were too far away from the Central Plains province. It was not possible for them to manage such an uncivilized land for a long time. The only way was to completely evacuate the population of the Central Plains province. Population was forever the most precious resource in the wilderness, because they represented an unending stream of production power. Previously, After Zhang Lang and Xiong Ba had joined forces to exterminate Huang Chao's army, they had adopted a similar three lights policy in Hunan province. Population, resources, and surrendered soldiers were all swept clean. The huge Hunan province had become a vacuum zone after this campaign. 9 out of 10 houses were empty. The Allied armies had just retreated, and the province was immediately filled with bandits. It returned to the original state of the wilderness. Everything was back to square one. Unfortunately, the snow had sealed off the mountains and the roads were difficult. Lord Chunxin and the others could only temporarily stop their operations and wait for the coming year. The lords of the Central Plains would not be able to enjoy this new year in peace. No one knew what kind of changes would happen this winter. Lord Chunxin must be feeling the most conflicted and unbearable at this time. He would never have thought that this snow would come so suddenly and fiercely. In just one night, it had changed the color of heaven and earth and put on new clothes. After paying 2 million gold coins, Lord Chunxin would definitely think of a way to recoup his costs and even generate profits. In the end, Lord Chunxin was still a businessman. What a businessman pursued was always profit. Before the operation, the elites of Lord Chunxin's family had already carefully calculated. Even without Gaia's year-end bonus, if everything went smoothly, this battle would still be profitable. It was just that a sudden heavy snowfall had disrupted their plans. Because of this, Ouyang Shua had no choice but to postpone the conference of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas to give Feng Qiuhuang enough energy to deal with the aftermath of the war in the Central Plains. Originally, Ouyang Shua's plan was to choose the location of this year's conference at Fallen Phoenix City. Unfortunately, this snow made the members not want to go to the north to spend the winter. Even Feng Qiuhuang wanted to escape from this damned winter. Everyone discussed and discussed. In the end, they actually chose Cliff Mountain City as the location of the conference. In the entire China region, at this time, only Cliff Mountain City had a pleasant climate. In reality, it was a holiday destination for the Spring Festival. How could it be an undeserved reputation? To be able to have a sunny beach party in this cold winter was undoubtedly extremely satisfying for the members of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas. Chapter 577. P.S. Holiday is over. 3,000 words per chapter will be restored. Everyone thought that the snow would bring complete peace to the wilderness. At least before the new year, there would be peace. Who would have thought that this tranquility would soon be broken again? No one expected that the 15th city in the China region would be promoted before the new year. The promoted city was a dark horse. Its lord was overturning heaven and earth, which was ranked 8th in Gaia's year-end bonus. Overturning heaven and earth was rewarded with 20,000 achievement points and promoted to a rank 3 marquee. After half a month of hard work, the promotion mission was finally completed and the territory was promoted to a rank 1 city. As a result, the 5th battle was successfully initiated. On the 15th of January in the 3rd year of Gaia, a system announcement resounded throughout the China region. System announcement: China region has successfully promoted 15 cities, triggering the battle system. The 5th battle, Battle of Mabe, will officially begin in 3 days. Please look forward to it. Friendly reminder: the Battle of Mabe is a non-mandatory battle scenario mission. Only the top 50 territories are eligible to participate. The Battle of Mabe was finally here. In the 4th year of Yuan Shou, Emperor Wu of Han mobilized 140,000 cavalrymen, 140,000 war horses, and 100,000 foot soldiers and porters under the command of Wei Qing and Hou Tsubing. They set off towards the Mabe Desert from the east and west. When the Xiongnu Chanyu heard the news, he moved his supplies and deployed his elite troops to the northern border of the desert to meet the Han army. After Wei Qing left the fortress, he learned that the Chanyu did not head east. He led his elite troops and ordered Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi to take the eastern route to provide support. Wei Qing led his troops for over 1,000 miles, passing through the desert and engaging the Chanyu's troops in battle. First, he used Wu Gang chariots to form a camp and stabilize the troops before sending out 5,000 cavalry. At dusk, a strong wind blew and sand and stones blew. Wei Qing took the opportunity to surround the Chanyu from both sides. The Chanyu saw that the Han army was large and strong. Knowing that it would be difficult for him to win, he led a few hundred elite cavalry and escaped northwest. The Xiongnu army was routed. Wei Qing sent light cavalry to pursue while he led his main force to follow. At Mountain Yan's Zhao Xian city, they killed 19,000 enemies and burned their grain to return home. Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi lost their way and could not meet up with Wei Qing in Maobei. Wei Qing ordered the chief scribe to summon Li Guang to the shogunate and interrogated him about his loss of Dao. Li Guang committed suicide out of humiliation. After Hua Xiubing led his troops out of the fortress, he brought along a small amount of supplies and rations. He commanded the captured Xiongnu people to be the vanguard and open a path for the Han army. They crossed the desert, crossed the river, and captured the chief minister Zhang Chu alive. They killed the king of the North Chariots and turned around to attack the left General Shuang and seized the enemy's flag and war drums. They also crossed Mount Nanhou, crossed the Gonglu River, and captured the Tung Tu Wang, the Prince of Han, and 83 other people, including the general, the prime minister, the Donghu, and the commandant. In this expedition, Hua Xiubing's troops suffered a loss of 10,000 men, but they managed to kill a total of 70,443 barbarians. At this point, the left and right virtuous princes of the Xiongnu had been completely cut off, leaving the Chanyu alone in the north. Hua Xiubing sealed the Wolf Story Mountain, gave Zen to Gaian, and returned to the Immensity Sea. After this battle, the Xiongnu fled far away, and there was no royal court in Monan. After this battle, the three famous generals would face different fates. Great General Wei Qing's merits and demerits offset each other, so he was not rewarded. Old General Li Guang committed suicide out of humiliation. When the people heard this, they wept, regardless of whether they knew or did not. Cavalry General Hua Xiubing was rewarded wantonly, and he was in the limelight for a while. 2 years later, he suddenly died at the age of 24, and people could not help but sigh. There was no doubt that these three famous generals, especially Wei Qing and Hua Xiubing, would be the target of the Lord's Domain players' frenzied pursuit. Even Ouyang Shuo was no exception. It must be known that Wei Qing and Hua Xiubing were both part of the 10 great generals of China in ancient times. They were on the same level as Bai Qi, Han Xian, and the others. Just as Ouyang Shuo was sorting out the information about the Battle of Mo Bay, he suddenly heard the sound of a system notification. System notification. Congratulations, the player not saying that has no clothes. You have met the requirements to participate in the Battle of Mo Bay. In this battle, regardless of the rank, every feudal lord can only lead 3,000 troops at most. Please be prepared in advance. Ouyang Shuo frowned when he heard this. With his current rank of a marquis, according to the rules of the battle, he could lead 50,000 troops. 3,000 was only the upper limit for a marquis of the first class. Comparing the two, the difference was 16 to 17 times. It was like heaven and earth. Gaia had always pursued the principle of fairness. They would not arbitrarily change the rules of the battle just because of Ouyang Shuo. It could only be said that this battle would be very different from the previous battles. The rank of nobility had always been the most important and core indicator that Gaia gave to the feudal lords. Ouyang Shuo did not believe that his rank of a first-class marquis would receive the same treatment as a first-class earl. If that was the case, what was the point of the feudal lords painstakingly earning merit points? As for what the compensation was, he would probably only know after entering the battle map. In addition to the number of troops, Gaia also set a strict limit on the number of feudal lords participating in the battle. There were estimated to be around 500 territories in the China region. Apart from some remote and desolate areas, most of them were promoted to third-class counties. If all of them participated in the battle, even if a feudal lord led 3,000 troops, it would be as high as 5 million. This time, Gaia eliminated more than 90% of the contestants in one go. With the development of the territories, it was extremely difficult to level up a county city. The difference between the levels of the territories was no longer as obvious as it was in Gaia. However, this did not mean that there was no difference between the development of the various territories. In the China region's territory ranking, when the territories were of the same level, the 4 territorial indexes that determined the territory's ranking were politics, economy, culture, and military. The higher the overall value of the 4 indexes, the higher the ranking. Before this, the feudal lords' competition for the territory ranking was only a fight for face. The higher the ranking, the more face they had. From now on, the competition for the territory ranking would involve real benefits. After all, whether or not one could participate in a battle would have a huge impact on the territory. In the worst-case scenario, it would be a missed opportunity to be promoted to a county city. In the future, the feudal lords would have to put more effort into the territory's 4 indexes under the premise that they focused on raising the territory's level. After all, these 4 indexes basically covered all aspects of the territory. There could not be any shortcomings in domestic and foreign affairs. In order to temper the young feudal lords, Gaia had put in a lot of effort. In this way, even if the top 50 territories in the China region all participated in the battle, the total number of the mutant army would not be more than 150,000. The mutant army would not be able to have a decisive impact on the Battle of Maobei. Because the number of troops they brought was the same, the feudal lords were on the same starting line, which was rare. The advantage that Shanghai City had always had in terms of military strength was gone. This battle is not going to be easy. Ouyang Shua let out a long sigh. More importantly, how would the feudal lords choose their side in this battle? Would there still be players who would choose the Han-Nu side that was destined to lose? Even if they wanted to take a gamble and reverse the situation, they would not be able to overcome the obstacle of national sentiment. Help the Han-Nu fight the Han army? Just the thought of it was a pain in the ass. Needless to say, the Han-Nu side did not have any generals that were worth subduing. The Western Han side, on the other hand, had 3 famous generals, as well as a large number of deputy generals and field generals. How to choose sides was a very simple problem. In this way, would Gaia not be afraid that the difference in a mutant army between the 2 camps would be too great? What kind of setting did Gaia have in mind? Everything was unknown. Even Ouyang Shua, who had been reborn, did not know much about this. In his previous life, the information about this battle was very limited on the forum. Otherwise, Ouyang Shua would have made preparations long ago. The only thing he could do was to order the Combat Readiness Division to make some targeted preparations based on the characteristics of the desert. For example, he stepped up the production of a large number of military ration pills. Marching in the desert was the most difficult thing to resupply. Otherwise, Emperor Wu of Han would not have conscripted more than 100,000 infantry soldiers to be responsible for the supply of cavalry. Now, Gaia had stipulated that each feudal lord could only bring a maximum of 3,000 soldiers. In this way, many of Ouyang Shua's arrangements have been wasted, and they were completely useless. It's really a bad start. Ouyang Shua could only bring 3,000 soldiers. He did not even need to think about it. He could just bring 3,000 divine guards to battle. Since he could not have an advantage in terms of the number of troops, Ouyang Shua could only plan to have an advantage in terms of the individual combat strength of the soldiers. This advantage was destined not to be too big. Which of the territories that were still struggling to survive in the wilderness did not have 3,000 elite cavalrymen? Although there was a gap between elite cavalry and the divine guards, the gap was not huge. As for the generals that followed the army, Ouyang Shua did not plan to recruit by Qi, Han Xian, and the other generals. It was not that he could not make it in time. After the system update, the feudal lord's troops no longer needed to go through specific teleportation formations to participate in the battle. As long as Ouyang Shua submitted the list to the system, no matter where the troops were, they could be teleported to the battle map. Gaia had set this up in consideration that with the expansion of the player's territory, it would be impossible for the feudal lord to gather all the troops to participate in the battle in just 3 days. For example, If Ouyang Shuo could bring 50,000 soldiers this time, he would definitely mobilize 3 major armies. The time it took to march on the road was not enough. In this regard, Gaia was very humane. It was flexible and did not rigidly adhere to the rules. Ouyang Shuo did not recruit Bai Qi and the others because he really did not want to make a big fuss. A mere 3,000 Divine Guardsmen was not enough for Bai Qi and the other Divine Generals. Even if the Alliance Army of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas was included, the total was less than 20,000 soldiers. Sending Bai Qi and the others was a waste of their talents. Instead of that, it was better to leave them in the wilderness and continue to reorganize the army. The 3,000 Divine Guards would be personally led by Ouyang Shuo. By now, Ouyang Shuo could also be considered a fierce general. In addition, Ouyang Shuo also planned to recruit a staff officer to accompany the army. The person he chose was Zhao Qua, the deputy director of the General Administration of Military Affairs and the chief of the War Department. Chapter 578. Ouyang Shuo didn't gather the members of the alliance for a meeting. It was already the 5th battle. Everyone knew what to do, so there was no need for them to give instructions. Moreover, the territory had developed to this point, and no one was an ignorant person. There was no need for Ouyang Shuo to give them advice one by one. It wouldn't be good to say too much. That was how people were. As their status increased, their mentality would naturally change. Not to mention Feng Xiuhuang and White Birch. Even if Siege Lion and the others were placed in the outside world, no matter how disappointing they would still be famous feudal lords. They were existences that most players had to look up to. Because of this, Ouyang Shuo was very careful and knew when to stop. He took the time to go to Cliff Mountain City to pick up Little White. It wasn't appropriate to call it Little White. Ever since Cliff Mountain City was established, the 3 of them had been cultivating in the Spirit Beast Pavilion and had already reached the initial stage. Other than Shui who was a special case, Little Blue and Little White were already close to adulthood. Little Blue's size was almost the same as its parents, making people feel intimidated at first sight. When it wasn't cultivating in the Spirit Beast Pavilion, Little Blue would often swim in the sea outside the city. The players who were active in Cliff Mountain City all knew that this was a different Yin. Many players saw Little Blue as the guardian beast of Cliff Mountain City. In fact, that was the case. The nearby sea was much quieter because of Little Blue's existence. The evil beasts in the sea rarely dared to get close to Jingzhou Island. Otherwise, if he wasn't careful, he would become Little Green's food. Little White's body also grew bigger by the day. Today, he was no longer the little wolf cub from before. Instead, he was an exceptionally mighty and handsome white wolf. However, its gaze didn't change. It was still lazy and didn't look energetic at all. As for Snow, she was much more mysterious. He had been cultivating for so long, but he didn't look any different from the outside. She was still so innocent and unaffected. Ouyang Shuo couldn't even check her attributes. Cultivation in the Spirit Beast Pavilion was undoubtedly very boring. The 3 of them were very close to Ouyang Shuo, especially Snow, who stuck close to Ouyang Shuo. If it wasn't for being or visiting them often, they probably wouldn't have lasted until now. Ouyang Shuo took Little White away. Even Little Qing, who usually ignored him, was reluctant to leave. Ouyang Shuo had a hunch that Little White, as the wolf god, might be of some help in the Battle of Ma Bei. That was why he brought Little White along. The other 2 children were naturally unable to follow along. However, he could consider bringing Little Qing along for the upcoming voyage. The next 2 days were extremely ordinary. All the preparations for the battle were in order. To the current Combat Readiness Division, it was extremely easy to prepare the logistics resources for 3,000 people. Every Divine Martial Guard was armed to the extreme. Radiant armor, Tang sword, lance, divine crossbow, etc. These were all standard equipment. He was armed to the teeth. This was especially so for the divine armed crossbow, which had been specially modified by the Combat Readiness Division. Even during high-speed movements like charging, as long as one trained well, one could still shoot 3 arrows consecutively. It was truly a killing machine. In addition, some divine martial guards with excellent archery skills were also equipped with longbows. Some of the mountain barbarian soldiers were equipped with one-handed shields according to their specialties. Every divine guard's equipment was custom-made. The value of a full set of equipment was no less than a few hundred gold coins. Every divine martial guard's luggage was filled with military rations pills. It was enough to last them and their horses for more than a month. After entering deep into the desert, even if the Han army wanted to provide logistics, they would not be able to. Therefore, they had to bring enough military rations pills. Ouyang Shuo believed that the other feudal lords must have made the same arrangements. The difference was that Shanghai City's military research was at the forefront of China. It was reported that the Combat Readiness Division was already developing a super military rations pill. Just one small pill was enough to support a cavalryman and his mount for a day. He had brought enough tents for the army. The new generation of military tents was only the size of a backpack after it was completely folded. As for carrying heavy loads, it was basically not a burden to the elite green beetle horses of the divine martial guards. It was difficult for an army to spend the night in the desert without tents. Apart from that, the Combat Readiness Division also made some modifications to the divine martial guards' cloaks. They added a specially made hood on top of the cloak. After wearing it, it could reduce the impact of sandstorms to a considerable extent. Ouyang Shuo originally planned to ask the Combat Readiness Division to develop a type of protective goggles. Unfortunately, Shanghai City did not have the technology to make glass, so they could only give up. Apart from that, the divine martial guards' boots, backpacks, daggers, belts, and even the shirts inside were all the latest new generation of special combat equipment developed by the Combat Readiness Division. They had already started developing this equipment when they were building the special combat base. Now, it had basically taken shape. The current divine martial guards truly had the framework of an ancient special combat force. Of course, there were also problems that the Combat Readiness Division could not solve. For example, drinking water. For an army in the desert, drinking water was as important as rations. It could even be said that it was the most important thing. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as compressed water in this world. Just relying on the water in the water pouch was definitely not enough. This could only be solved by the divine martial guards themselves. When Ouyang Shuo bought the super space at the auction, he expanded the storage pouch to 10,000 cubic meters, which was enough to store enough drinking water. Unfortunately, the storage pouch could not be used even on the battlefield. On the 18th of January in the third year of Gaia, at 9 in the morning, the system announcement rang. System announcement. In the spring of 119 BC, after the battle between the south of the desert and the west of the river, the Xiongnu Chanyu led his troops to the north of the desert. However, they continued to attack the northern prefectures of the Han dynasty, attempting to lure the Han army to cross the desert. Emperor Wu of Han sent General Wei Qing and Cavalry General Hua Xubing to lead 50,000 cavalrymen and tens of thousands of infantrymen into North Desert in an attempt to wipe out the main force of the Xiongnu. He also organized hundreds of thousands of infantrymen and tens of thousands of horses to support the battle. This battle was the culmination of Emperor Wu's strategic attack on the Xiongnu. It was also the decisive battle between the Xiongnu Chanyu and the Western Han dynasty, which ended in a complete victory for the Han army. The fifth epic battle, the Battle of North Desert, has officially begun. In the square of Shanghai City, the 3,000 divine martial guards were in formation and ready to go. They checked the conditions to participate in the battle and confirmed the number of participants. Ouyang Shuo was about to choose his faction when he heard the system notification. System notification. In the Battle of North Desert, the mutant army will be the Western Han Dynasty's faction by default. No need to choose. Default faction? Interesting. Ouyang Shuo mumbled to himself. Before he could finish, another system notification sounded. System notification. The Western Han Dynasty's faction is divided into Wei Qing's faction and Hua Xubing's faction. Please make your choice. What does this mean? The battle hasn't even started, and we're already choosing sides? Ouyang Shuo frowned. He felt that this battle was full of mysteries. Historically, the The Battle of North Desert had indeed been divided into two factions. Wei Qing led his troops and set off from Dingxiang. Hua Zubing led his troops and set off from Dai County. The distance between the two cities was more than 100 miles. If that was the case, they really had to choose sides in advance so that they could immediately join the battle. What's the difference? Ouyang Shuo was still worried. The route chosen will involve different missions to subdue different generals, Gaia revealed. What do you mean? Ouyang Shuo asked. The feudal lord who chooses the Eastern Front will be the first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain and will be able to subdue Hua Zubing. The feudal lord who chooses the Western Front will be given two routes. Which two routes? Ouyang Shuo's heart twitched when he heard that he could directly subdue Hua Zubing. Gaia was really going all out this time. The central army that follows great General Wei Qing will be able to subdue Wei Qing as long as they kill Chanyu. The eastern army that follows Li Guang and Zhao Shiqi will be able to subdue Li Guang as long as they successfully find them and bring them back to the right path. This will prevent Li Guang from committing suicide out of shame because he got lost. Gaia was not ambiguous. Ouyang Shuo was speechless when he heard this. This time, Gaia was going to put the three famous generals on the table for the feudal lords to fight over. It sounded like the opportunity to subdue a famous general was within reach. The more this was so, the more uneasy Ouyang Shuo felt. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. How could it be possible to subdue a divine general without paying a certain price? More importantly, even if they had to pay a heavy price, Yusha would probably return victorious in the end. There were only 3 famous generals, but there were 50 feudal lords participating in the battle. This was only one of the challenges. The bigger challenge was still the mission itself. None of the missions sounded easy to complete. The first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain. That was a feat that had only been accomplished by the genius general, Hua Zubing. Could a feudal lord with just 3,000 cavalrymen achieve this? Kill Chanyu. Even great General Wei Qing could not do this. As for finding Li Guang, it was purely luck. Even Li Guang, who had fought against the Xiongnu for his entire life, could get lost in the desert. It was the first time that they had encountered an army of mutants in the desert. To find a right path required a lot of luck. Hence, no matter which mission it was, it seemed like an impossible one. This was equivalent to Gaia giving 50 feudal lords a sweet fantasy. What was worse was that Gaia had suddenly done this before they set off. This way, no matter if it was the Alliance of Mountains and Seas or the Yanhuang Alliance, they would not be able to work together. Everyone's choice was random. Unfortunately, this bait was too tempting. Even Ouyang Shuo, who knew that this was a trap, had no choice but to close his eyes and jump in. The key now was which route to take. Chapter 579. Ouyang Shuo had to choose between Wei Qing, Hua Zubing, and Li Guang. The first to be ruled out was the veteran General Li Guang. Ouyang Shuo was confident that he could find the flying General Li Guang in the desert because he had the descendant of the wolf deity, Little White. However, Ouyang Shuo was unwilling to give up on Wei Qing and Hua Zubing. To the current Shanghai city, an additional general like Li Guang would not bring about any major changes. On the contrary, if they had an additional divine general, it would be enough to support the Fourth Army. The choice couldn't be any clearer. Between Wei Qing and Hua Zubing, Ouyang Shuo found it difficult to choose. Wei Qing and Hua Zubing were the twin pillars of the Han Empire. Both of them were famous generals of their generation. Even their best tactics were to infiltrate deep into enemy territory, win by surprise, launch long-range attacks, and encircle the enemy. Wei Qing was the pioneer of this tactic, while Hua Zubing carried it forward. Of course, there was a huge difference between the two of them. Wei Qing was good at controlling the overall situation. He did not focus on how many people he killed. Instead, he focused on achieving his strategic goals. He focused on dealing a heavy blow to the enemy's economy, obtaining the enemy's resources, and using the war to sustain the war, causing the enemy to lose the foundation for survival. It could be said that Wei Qing was a commander with a clear strategy. He was humble and courteous, not arrogant. and loved his soldiers. He was a rare good general since ancient times. Hua Tuobing was different. He was a genius vanguard. He was flexible in battle and did not stick to one style. In war, Hua Tuobing did not want the enemy's resources. He focused on killing the enemy's leaders and strength. He took military supplies from the enemy and did not wait for supplies from the rear. In this way, he could maximize the mobility and flexibility of his troops, ensure that they could capture more enemy leaders, kill more enemies, and fully utilize the advantages of cavalry. The two of them were evenly matched, and each had their own merits. Therefore, both of them were very suitable for Shanghai City. What Ouyang Shuo considered was the difference in the mission between the two of them. Wei Qing's mission was to kill the Xiongnu Chanyu. To be honest, this mission was very fortuitous. Furthermore, with Ouyang Shuo's 3,000 troops, it was impossible for him to gain an overwhelming advantage in terms of military strength. It was truly difficult to subdue Wei Qing. On the contrary, Hua Tuobing's mission was to be the first to arrive at Wolf Story Mountain. Although the journey would definitely be difficult and dangerous, with Whitey around, Ouyang Shuo's confidence was still greater than that of the other overlords. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Ouyang Shuo finally chose Hua Tuobing. Choose Hua Tuobing's route, Ouyang Shuo said. System notification. Route selection complete. Congratulations to player not wearing for activating war teleportation. The teleportation limit is 3,000 people. Teleportation begins. After a brief moment of dizziness, Ouyang Shuo and the rest finally arrived at the Mo Bay battlefield. System notice. Welcome player not saying you have no clothes, who has arrived at the Eastern Front camp of Western Han, Dai County. The place where Ouyang Shuo descended was the military camp outside Daijun City. Streaks of white light flashed across the camp, signifying the arrival of the mutant army. Right at this moment, the sound of the system notification sounded out by Ouyang Shuo's ears once more. System notice. Congratulations to player not saying you have no clothes. It has been detected that you are a first-rank marquis. Special compensation of 500 military campaign resource points. Friendly reminder. The military campaign resource points can be exchanged for military supplies in the military camp or along the way. They're extremely precious. Please use them carefully. Military campaign resource points? It's Gaia's new trick again. Ouyang Shuo guessed. Based on the 500 military campaign resource points he received as compensation, a second-rank marquis would receive 200 points, and a third-rank marquis would receive 100 points. As for a first-rank earl, he had just reached the threshold of leading 3,000 troops, so he probably wouldn't receive any additional compensation. This time, Ouyang Shuo finally felt a little better. Before he was done, another system notification sounded. System notice. Congratulations to player not saying you have no clothes. It has been detected that you are a first-rank marquis. Special compensation of 10,000 merit points and an additional 15 military campaign contribution points. The battle hadn't even started, and Ouyang Shuo had already easily obtained 10,000 merit points, which could be considered a basic compensation. 10,000 merit points might seem like a lot, but compared to the sharp decrease in the number of troops he could lead, it was somewhat insignificant. Originally, Ouyang Shuo had thought that he could obtain at least 100,000 merit points in this battle. But now, it seemed that his hopes were slim. As for the additional 15 military campaign contribution points reward, how much he could obtain would depend on the ability of Ouyang Shuo and the 3,000 divine martial guards he led. Gaia was indeed Gaia. They upheld fairness and didn't deliberately weaken Ouyang Shuo's existence. At this point, Ouyang Shuo's compensation for his title also came to an end. Ouyang Shuo let Wang Feng lead the troops to the camp to settle down, while he stayed in the military camp square and looked around. He wanted to observe which strong opponents would choose Hua Tuobing's route. As far as the eye could see, the mutant army in the military camp was bustling with activity. This was not surprising. In the eyes of the players, Hua Tuobing was in existence on the level of a heavenly king. In the wilderness, there were plenty of lords who liked Hua Tuobing. Moreover, Hua Tuobing's subduing mission also seemed to be the least risky. Naturally, the number of lords who chose this route was also the highest. As expected, the military campaign announcement confirmed Ouyang Shua's guess. Military campaign announcement. A total of 45 lords participated in the Battle of Ma Bei. 22 lords from the Hua Tuobing route, 180,000 lords from the Wei Qing route, and 5 lords from the Li Guang route. 45 lords meant that before the battle even started, 5 lords had already given up. The lords who gave up probably didn't have much hope for this battle. Sometimes giving up decisively was also a rational choice. Hua Tuobing was indeed the first choice of the lords. Half of the lords chose Hua Tuobing's route. The old general, Li Guang, was quite miserable. Only 5 lords chose his branch. If these 5 people were not carrying some kind of secret weapon, then they were preparing to play a game of blind cats trying to catch a dead mouse. The competition is fierce. Ouyang Shua sighed as he continued to search for targets. Needless to say, he really did meet a few familiar faces. The first was Ouyang Shua's archenemy, Military Kill Ripper, who had just made a name for himself at the auction. Military Kill Ripper also brought 3,000 elite cavalry. Upon closer inspection, they were somewhat different from the Central Plains cavalry. The weapons they used were the rarely seen scimitars. Even the warhorses they rode on were all Mongolian warhorses. Mongolian elite cavalry? Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed. In that case, Military Kill Ripper had made progress in buying the Mongolian cavalry training manual. The 3,000 elite cavalry he brought this time was the result of his latest training. Military Kill Ripper had put in a lot of effort to bring 3,000 Mongolian elite warhorses. What caught Ouyang Shua's attention was the general standing next to Military Kill Ripper. At first, Ouyang Shua didn't recognize this person. However, the Han soldiers in the barracks were the first to recognize this general. Grand Commandant Marquis Zhou. The entire barracks was in an uproar. Ouyang Shua thought for a moment and guessed who this person was. The famous general of the Western Han dynasty, Zhou Yafu. Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. Military Kill Ripper was really lucky to find such a peerless general through the summoning talisman. Speaking of Zhou Yafu, his most glorious achievement was quelling the rebellion of the 7 states during the reign of Emperor Jing of Han. According to the time shown on the battle map, Zhou Yafu's death was only around 20 years ago. No wonder the Han soldiers in the barracks recognized Zhou Yafu immediately. With this person's help, Military Kill Ripper would probably receive some special treatment. Originally, Ouyang Shua had thought of bringing Han Xian along to build a relationship. But when he thought of Han Xian's tragic ending in history, he gave up on the idea. It was better not to bring up this general's tragic past. Speaking of which, Zhou Yafu was the second son of Marquis Jiangzhou Bo, one of the founding generals of the Western Han dynasty. As for Zhou Bo, it was during the Battle of Giant Deer that he officially served under Feng Xiuhuang. Originally, after the Battle of Ma Bei, when the Western Han dynasty entered the wilderness, it was highly possible that Feng Xiuhuang could directly recruit Zhou Yafu through this relationship. But unexpectedly, Military Kill Ripper beat them to it through the summoning talisman. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. This person is a formidable opponent. Ouyang Shua didn't want to look at Military Kill Ripper's smug expression anymore, and continued to search for other targets. In the Yin-Wang alliance, other than Military Kill Ripper, there were 2 other people who chose Hua Tuobing's route. They were Di Chun and Zhang Lang, another strong pair of teams. The cavalry that Di Chun brought with him were also riding elite Mongolian warhorses. As for the battle wolves, they were slightly inferior. After all, there weren't any good horses in the Jianye district. As for the green beetle horses in the Lianzhou basin, it was purely a coincidence. Di Chun choosing Hua Tuobing's route was within Ouyang Shua's expectations. After all, Di Chun already had the old General Lian Pe, and with the young genius General Hua Tuobing, it was a perfect match. What Ouyang Shua didn't expect was that the battle wolves were also obsessed with Hua Tuobing. The charm of a genius general was indeed extraordinary. In fact, when Ouyang Shua saw Di Chun and the others, Di Chun and the others also noticed Ouyang Shua's presence. For Di Chun and the others, this wasn't good news either. In particular, Di Chun and the others noticed the divine martial guards beside Ouyang Shua. This blood guard had long been famous in the world, and everyone knew about them. In a situation where the number of people in the China region was equal, no one had the confidence to fight against the divine martial guards. What bad luck! Di Chun didn't hide his disappointment. On the other hand, Zhang Lang, who was standing by the side, smiled faintly. Traces of fighting spirit surged in his eyes. On the side of the alliance of mountains and seas, Ouyang Shua was not alone. Like Ouyang Shua, Bai Hua and dragon-seeking acupoint had also chosen Hua Tsubing's route. Needless to say, Zhang Liao and Qin Xiong were also the main candidates for this battle. When the two alliances were compared, the alliance of mountains and seas was not at a disadvantage. Chapter 580. The three members of the alliance of mountains and seas naturally gathered together. Ouyang Shua asked Bai Hua why she chose Hua Tsubing's route. Traveling thousands of miles was an extremely arduous journey for a lady. Therefore, Ouyang Shua was quite surprised to see Bai Hua in Dai County. Because Hua Tsubing is handsome, Bai Hua's answer did not hide her infatuated nature. Ouyang Shua was speechless. What kind of stupid reason was that? Speaking of which, when Great Emperor of Han Wu was a hit, Hua Tsubing had captivated thousands of girls. He did not expect that a homebody like Bai Hua would also fall for it. Big sister, can we stop fooling around? Ouyang Shua was conflicted. Screw you. Bai Hua did not hold back against Ouyang Shua. She punched him and explained with a smile, I will stay in Dai County to see if there are any side missions. General Zhang Liao will be the one to go to war. That's more like it. Ouyang Shua heaved a sigh of relief. At that moment, the person in charge of the military camp gathered the lords for a meeting. Gaia did not choose any mutants to represent them in the Battle of Ma Bei. They directly gathered them together for a meeting. In the central tent, Ouyang Shua met the commander of the military camp. This person was not the famous champion marquis, Hua Tsubing, but a nameless general. What's going on? Where's the champion marquis? This greatly disappointed the lords who wanted to witness Hua Tsubing's splendor. Among them was a certain infatuated girl. Everyone, please be quiet. The commander of the military camp knew that he was just a bystander, so he directly explained, the white cavalry general has already led his troops to war 3 days ago. The tent was in an uproar. Already gone to war? What should we do? A lord asked. The current military camp is only a place for the logistics of the army. Everyone can resupply here. Tomorrow morning, you will lead your troops into the desert and chase after the white cavalry general. The commander said and waved his hand. Immediately, soldiers carried out a pile of blueprints and distributed them to the various lords. What you have now is a simple map of the army, the commander explained. Ouyang Shua took a look and immediately frowned. It's really simple. The entire map was drawn with sheepskin. There were only a few crooked lines, which represented the army's marching route, starting from Dai County and ending at Wolf Story Mountain. As for the water sources, supplies, and the distribution of the Xiongnu tribes along the way, there was nothing at all. Even Ouyang Shua suspected that if he only relied on this map, then not to mention arriving at Wolf Story Mountain, just being able to smoothly pass through the desert would already be extremely fortunate. Great God Gaia, are you really trying to prevent the feudal lords from subduing Hua Tsubing? Ouyang Shua could not help but complain in his heart. The other lords were also very dissatisfied with the so-called marching map. The first step of the taming mission gave everyone a rude awakening. Some of the lords who had originally wanted to fish in troubled waters were now regretting their decision. Obviously, the difficulty of the mission far exceeded their expectations. Before the battle began, they were still thinking of leading their troops into battle with the main army. Who would have thought that Guya would be so unpredictable? After all, Li Guang was an old general who fought against the Xiongnu. Even so, he was still lost in the desert. From this, it could be seen how dangerous the desert was. For the mutant army like them, Entering the gates of hell in the desert without anyone to lead the way would only bode ill rather than well, even if they were able to successfully leave the desert. Finding Hua Xiubing and his troops in the vast grasslands would also be a difficult task. One must know that Hua Xiubing's troops were known for their flexibility. Even the Xiongnu often failed to catch them, let alone Hua Xiubing's troops. Moreover, Hua Xiubing's troops had already set off 3 days ago. It would be an impossible task to catch up to them. What they were afraid of was not finding the main Han army, but running into the hands of the Xiongnu thinking about it. Their future was bleak. Some of the feudal lords already had thoughts of retreating. This is too much, some of the feudal lords grumbled. However, the commanding general of the military camp did not care and directly dismissed the meeting, as if he was a hands-off boss. The feudal lords could only shake their heads helplessly and leave. Walking out of the tent, Bai Hua asked, "Wu Yi, what do you think?" Before Ouyang Shuo could answer, Dragon Seeking Acupoint answered, "Gaia will not issue a mission that is impossible to solve. The fact that we don't have any clues means that we haven't found any clues." Dragon Seeking Acupoint was indeed a mission maniac. His understanding of the mission was very precise. Even Bai Hua could not help but nod when he heard this. "Then where do you think the clues are?" Bai Hua asked. "The military camp." Dragon Seeking Acupoint was certain. "Oh, what do you mean?" Bai Hua was curious. Dragon Seeking Acupoint pointed at the rising and falling tents and said with a smile, "Dai Prefecture, or of the military camp, is the headquarters of Hua Xiubing's route. It's also the logistics hub. This is the only place we can come into contact with. It's impossible for Gaia to hide clues outside of this framework." "Is it possible to find clues in Dai Prefecture City?" Bai Hua had his own ideas. "We can't rule out that possibility." Dragon Seeking Acupoint did not jump to conclusions. "It seems that we have to split up," Ouyang Shuo said. In reality, Ouyang Shuo's mind was not on this. Just now, Ouyang Shuo had paid special attention to military kill Ripper and his party. Who would have thought that he would really discover a trace of abnormality? Ouyang Shuo noticed that while the other lords were feeling dejected, the corners of Army Kill Ripper's mouth curled up into a complacent smile. Although it was just a flash, it did not escape Ouyang Shuo's eyes. Obviously, this was a lord who could not hide his thoughts. Military Kill Ripper was not like Di Chun and Battle Wolf, who could not hide their joy. From the looks of it, the Yanhuang Alliance, or at least Military Kill Ripper, had already received some insider information about this battle. This was the advantage of being a big family. Ouyang Shuo was helpless. Of course, Ouyang Shuo believed that Military Kill Ripper had obtained some information. Otherwise, the Yanhuang Alliance would have taken a side at the beginning of the battle and made a fuss about it. In reality, only Military Kill Ripper and the other two had chosen Hua Xiubing's route. How interesting. Ouyang Shuo was full of fighting spirit. Ouyang Shuo did not mention this discovery to Bai Hua and Battle Wolf. No matter what, he had to find the clues for the mission first. Bai Hua was preparing to head into the city, while Dragon Seeking Point was searching the military camp. As for Ouyang Shuo, he did not go anywhere, but headed straight for the military camp supply point. Ouyang Shuo wanted to know what kind of supplies the Han army had provided. Apart from that, Ouyang Shuo also wanted to know how to use the 500 war resource points that Gaia had given him. According to what the commander of the military camp had said, all the mutant legions could receive supplies. The person in charge of supplies was naturally the camp's rations officer. He was in his 30s and had a fat head and big ears. He had a big belly that was almost bursting out of his general's uniform. There were many lords who came to ask about supplies in front of the warehouse. Ouyang Shuo was not in a hurry. He stood to the side and waited patiently. This observation made Ouyang Shuo understand a lot of things. It turned out that if an ordinary lord didn't have a battle resource point, he could only receive one supply, and it was limited to 3,000 people. According to the rations officer, not even a grain of rice could be given. The supplies they received were only basic supplies such as biscuits, fodder, and drinking water. At the very least, they would be given some crudely made arrows. As for weapons and equipment, they didn't even have a single one. There were some greedy lords who did not bring enough resources before entering the battle map, hoping to obtain resources like they did in the previous battle maps. They would probably cry to death. Gaia was trying to force the lords into a dead end. Ouyang Shual waited for the lords to disperse before he strode forward. Strangely enough, the rations officer acted high and mighty in front of the other lords. But when he saw Ouyang Shual, he immediately changed his attitude and greeted him with a smile as if he was seeing his mother. There's nothing wrong with smiling. He's hiding evil intentions. Ouyang Shual immediately became vigilant. He also discovered that although the rations officer looked like an idiot, he was actually very shrewd. His beady eyes were filled with treachery. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a lucrative job. Marquis, are you here to resupply? The rations officer almost nodded and bowed. With his physique, he could still greet so dexterously. As the saying goes, one doesn't hit a smiling person. No matter how vigilant Ouyang Shual was, there wasn't a trace of arrogance on his face. He asked, "Dare I ask, have you heard of war resource points?" Ouyang Shual noticed that the rations officer's eyes immediately lit up. The smile on his face became more and more flattering. I've heard of it. I've heard of it." He smiled and nodded vigorously. When Ouyang Shual saw this, he couldn't help but shiver. How do I exchange for war resource points? Ouyang Shual continued to ask. Marquis, please take a look. Like a magic trick, a thin account book suddenly appeared in the rations officer's hand. He respectfully handed it to Ouyang Shual, his eyes filled with greed and desire. The rations officer was dressed sloppily, and even his hands were covered in grease. But this account book was extremely clean, without a trace of dirt. It was obviously an extremely precious item. Ouyang Shual resisted his disgust and took the account book. When he flipped it open, his eyes lit up. So the mystery is here. There were some rare items listed on the account book. The first item on the list made Ouyang Shual overjoyed. Exquisite marching map just from the name. One could tell what kind of item it was. Without a doubt, these rare items all needed to be exchanged for war resource points. Just this map required 100 war resource points. Black, so black. Chapter 581. Resource points were good, but it was painful to use them. As the only first-rank marquis in China, Ouyang Shual only received 500 resource points. This was only enough for him to buy a few items from the ration officer's secret account book. He had to be careful. Other than the exquisite military map, there were two other things that made Ouyang Shual very tempted. Rapid marching scroll. After use, increases marching speed by 50 for 4 hours without any side effects. Price, 200 campaign resource points. This was undoubtedly a weapon for rushing at the last moment. With the speed of the Divine Martial Guard, they could travel 200 miles in 4 hours with the help of this scroll. Most importantly, there were no side effects after a rapid march. It wouldn't be a burden on the warhorses. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth it if a group of warhorses died from exhaustion. Ouyang Shual bought it without hesitation. The other item wasn't an item, but a living person. They were the local Xiongnu guides that Ouyang Shual lacked the most. They were familiar with the desert and grasslands. The guides sold by the ration officer were also divided into different grades. The best Xiongnu guide was not only familiar with the route, but could also easily find water sources. Apart from that, he was also an outstanding cavalry warrior with a keen sense of smell. In the words of Emperor Wu of Han, he was the best hunting dog. Hua Xiubing's army could move freely in the hinterland of the Xiongnu because of such people. The guide was good, but it wasn't cheap either. It cost 250 resource points. Currently, Ouyang Shual was the only one who could afford it. The problem was that Ouyang Shual wouldn't have any more resource points to buy a military map after buying this guide. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Since he had a living map, he didn't need a dead one anymore. In the end, Ouyang Shual made up his mind and bought the best guide. In just 2 moves, Ouyang Shual had almost used up all the resource points in his hands. Ouyang Shual saw that he couldn't buy anything he liked with the remaining 50 points, so he kept them. Didn't Gaia say that there might be supply points along the way? Perhaps it could even be of use. Since Ouyang Shuo was so generous, the grain officer naturally laughed heartily. His fat belly trembled as he laughed. It was a ghastly sight to behold. He even suspected that Gaia had given the provisions officer some special instructions. Ouyang Shuo had no intention to investigate this matter any further, and what he wanted to do now was to inspect the goods on the spot. Ouyang Shuo put away the rapid marching scroll, and the top-notch guide also revealed his true appearance. At first glance, he looked like a typical Xiongnu. His facial features were clearly different from that of Han. He was wearing a Han army uniform, which was quite unique. Marquis, this lowly Huyin Qiu pays his respects to you. Ouyang Shuo nodded and left with Huyin Qiu. After making such a big deal, the grain officer was surprisingly generous for once. He promised Ouyang Shuo that he would supply his troops with sincerity. When Ouyang Shuo heard this, he nodded in thanks. At 4 p.m, Bai Hua returned to the barracks. Bai Hua didn't find any clues about the quest, but he did receive a few side quests. Because of this, Bai Hua was determined to stay in Dai County. Then, Ouyang Shuo told Bai Hua about the war resource points. Bai Hua was now a second-rank marquis, and he had 200 war resource points. He could be considered a tycoon among the lords. Bai Hua's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he turned around and left. As for the quest Dragon Seeking Acupoint, he really found some clues. Other than asking about some bits and pieces of information, he was also lucky enough to recruit a crippled guide. Although this guide couldn't be compared to Huyin Qiu, he was still free. He was probably the same as the most ordinary guide sold by the grain officer. He had nearly 100 war resource points left. He had to admit that in terms of the quest, Dragon Seeking Acupoint was indeed outstanding. As for the usage of the war resource points, Dragon Seeking Acupoint had naturally been discovered, so there was no need for Ouyang Shuo to tell him. Ouyang Shuo didn't ask about what the two exchanged for. In the end, there was only one person who could subdue Huo Tsubing. Although they were allies, strictly speaking, they were still competitors at this moment. At most, they could only work together in the early stages. As for not stabbing him in the back at the last moment, that was already good enough. Night fell amidst all the commotion. Dai County was located at the edge of the desert, and the weather was abnormally dry. From afar, one could vaguely see the sun slowly setting in the depths of the desert. The afterglow of the setting sun dyed the desert in a golden color. It was a beautiful sight. Who could have imagined what kind of murderous intent was hidden within this beauty? Under Huyin Qiu's guidance, the 3,000 divine martial guards had completed their resupply. The grain officer was a man of his word, and for once, he was generous and actually gave them 50 warhorses. One must know that in the Han Dynasty, a good warhorse was worth tens of thousands of gold. When a mutant army entered the battlefield, they couldn't bring extra warhorses. A cavalry could only bring one warhorse. Thus, although a divine martial guard had 3 warhorses, they couldn't bring them to the battlefield. Although 50 warhorses wasn't a lot, they could still be used in emergencies. It seemed that Ouyang Shuo had indeed let the grain officer earn a lot. Apart from the warhorses, there were also some secret weapons that the Han army had prepared to deal with the desert. Ouyang Shuo didn't understand the bits and pieces. On the other hand, Huyin Qiu couldn't help but nod his head when he saw it. It was obvious that the grain officer didn't lie to him. He had indeed taken out his trump card. When the other lords saw this, they couldn't help but be envious. The sun set in the west, and night officially fell. After a day of clamor, the barracks finally quieted down. Tomorrow morning, all the divisions would set out for battle. Next, they would naturally have a good night's rest to build up their strength. For the mutant army, this was probably the most peaceful night they could sleep. The entire barracks was silent. Late at night, Ouyang Shuo was sleeping, yet he faintly heard a wave of woo-woo sounds. Not good. Ouyang Shuo immediately woke up. He could tell that it was White Yi's voice. When Whitey appeared in the barracks, it attracted a lot of attention. No one expected that Marquis Lin Zhou would actually bring a spirit beast, a white wolf, into the battlefield. When they thought of the desert environment, some clever lords couldn't hide the envy in their eyes. Ouyang Shuo quickly got up and walked out of the tent. Marquis. The guards on night duty saluted in surprise. Ouyang Shuo waved his hand and followed the sound to a corner of the barracks. The guards looked at each other. When they sensed the change in the Marquis, they quickly followed him. The Tang saber that hung on his waist was already in his hand. The atmosphere in the barracks suddenly became tense. Whining, White E's voice became more and more urgent, and it even sounded like it was in pain. When Ouyang Shuo saw this, his face became colder, and he started to jog. The two guards behind him were even more astonished. The two of them looked at each other again, and one of them quietly turned around and left. After turning around a tent, Ouyang Shuo finally saw Xiao Bai behind it. The scene in front of him made him extremely angry. He saw a dozen soldiers surrounding Whitey and stabbing it with their spears. If it wasn't for Whitey's supernatural abilities and the fact that it had cultivated in the Spirit Beast Pavilion, it would have died on the spot. Even so, Whitey's body was already covered in blood. Ouyang Shuo also noticed that there were two soldiers lying behind the encirclement, and he didn't know if they were dead or alive. If there was no accident, they should have been injured by Whitey. Who's there? This group of people was quite vigilant. How dare you? Ouyang Shuo shouted, and the Scarlet Knight's sword was already out of its sheath. At this moment, the Scarlet Knight's sword was already very different from before. The soul of the Red Dragon was successfully injected into the Scarlet Knight sword by Oyezi, and it became a sword spirit. Although the Scarlet Sky sword did not advance and become a top-notch saint artifact in one go, its power and spirituality were much more mystical than ordinary saint artifacts. If it encountered any opportunities, the Scarlet Knight's sword would advance to a holy weapon soon. When the Scarlet Knight's sword was out of its sheath, the swords on the waists of the others couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, the Scarlet Knight sword already had the posture of the owner of all swords. Any other treasured sword would be inferior to the Scarlet Knight's sword. Marquis Lianzhou. Someone recognized Ouyang Shuo, and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. At this moment, the soldiers were about to scatter and flee in all directions without thinking. Want to leave? It's too late. Ouyang Shuo raised his sword and charged into the crowd. Sword light flashed. The killing sword appeared in the military camp again. Boundless killing intent enveloped the entire battlefield. The soldiers who were about to escape suddenly arrived, and with the addition of a great force, it made it difficult for them to move. This was the aura field. The sword aura field of the killing sword. Just how terrifying was this aura? Ouyang Shuo wandered around, and when the sword light flashed, the enemies fell to the ground. The guards behind Ouyang Shuo, including Whitey, also joined the battle. In less than 10 minutes, all 15 soldiers fell to the ground. Ouyang Shuo didn't kill them. He still wanted to find out which force these people belonged to. The enemy's intention could be said to be vicious. They must have discovered White E's miraculous ability and were afraid that Ouyang Shuo would take the lead, so they wanted to take advantage of the dark and windy night to get rid of a big hidden danger. However, they never thought that the inconspicuous White E's battle strength would be so shocking. Under the siege of more than 10 elite soldiers, it didn't fall into a disadvantageous position at all. What was more unexpected was that even though Ouyang Shuo was asleep, his perception was still so sharp. He immediately sensed that Whitey was in trouble and quickly came to help. Otherwise, their plot would really succeed. Ouyang Shuo wanted to see who it was that wanted to use such a despicable method. Chapter 582. Just as Ouyang Shuo took down more than a dozen soldiers, the sound of footsteps came from the darkness. Ouyang Shuo narrowed his eyes and held his sword. An entire platoon of soldiers appeared in Ouyang Shuo's field of vision. The military uniforms they were wearing were exactly the same as the soldiers from before. Are they together? Ouyang Shuo muttered to himself. Even Ouyang Shuo had to think twice before fighting against 100 soldiers alone. Fortunately, Ouyang Shuo wasn't fighting alone. Just as the other side was about to forcefully attack and take away the wounded soldiers on the ground, another set of footsteps came from the darkness. It was Chun Dameng and his personal guards rushing over. The guards on night duty sensed that something was wrong and went to inform their captain. Chun Damong finally arrived before the crossfire. The two teams happened to run into each other. The small space was crowded. The smell of gunpowder permeated the air. Marquis, Chun Damong glanced at the other side and calmly saluted Ouyang Shaw. "Take them down." Ouyang Shaw didn't hesitate. The platoon that had just arrived should be the enemy's reinforcement. Seeing that they had been exposed, they wanted to bluff their way out or destroy the evidence. How could Ouyang Shaw allow them to be so unscrupulous? Chun Damong didn't say a word and directly led his team to charge at the enemy. The divine martial guards had never been afraid of anyone in a one-on-one fight. Not to mention that the personal guards were the most elite of the divine martial guards. The battle between the two sides had completely broken the peace of the camp and alarmed all the forces. The surroundings of the tent were filled with lords who had come to watch the show. Their eyes narrowed when they saw Ouyang Shaw standing there with his sword. Then, they noticed the blood-stained whitey next to Ouyang Shaw, and a flash of understanding flashed in their eyes. This group of fellows really wanted to watch a good show and didn't mind the matter getting bigger. Ouyang Shaw was expressionless when he saw this. Chun Damong didn't disappoint him. By the time the Han patrol arrived, the enemy had already been taken down by Chun Damong's team. "Marquis, what's going on?" the leading officer asked. Ouyang Shaw then explained the entire incident to Qin Nan. This time, there was a complete uproar. There were witnesses and material evidence. Even if he wanted to deny it, he probably couldn't. The problem was that this was a battle map, and the troops brought by each lord were not registered in the barracks. It would be difficult to find out which territory this army was from. The officer had a troubled look on his face. He was afraid that Ouyang Shaw would take the opportunity to stir up trouble. Ouyang Shaw looked around at the surrounding lords and said coldly, "What? You dare to do it, but don't dare to admit it? Only a despicable person would use such a despicable method." The entire place was silent. Since the other party had done this in secret, he would naturally not stand out and admit it. Regardless of whether they were present or not, they were all suspects. Since no one admitted it, Ouyang Shaw was helpless. Time was limited, and he couldn't interrogate them one by one. "Sir, leave these people to me, how about it?" Ouyang Shaw turned around and looked at the patrol captain. "Marquis, please go ahead." The patrol captain was naturally happy to shift the blame. Generally speaking, they would try not to get involved in the conflicts between the mutants if they could. Ouyang Shaw nodded. Then his eyes suddenly turned cold, and he gave Chun Damong a look. Chun Damong understood. Without any hesitation, he led his troops forward and placed the Tang sabers on the enemy's necks. He was going to execute them on the spot. The captured soldiers did have some guts. None of them actually begged for mercy. Chun Damong was the first to swing his Tang saber. In an instant, more than 100 heads fell to the ground, and blood flowed everywhere. The blood vividly displayed the cruelty of this battle. Before the armies set off, the lords had already started stabbing each other with knives, trying to get rid of each other. Among the crowd, someone's face twitched involuntarily. Seeing how ruthless the Marquis of Lianzhou was, the surrounding lords felt a chill down their necks. Ouyang Shaw wanted to use this to establish his might and warn his other opponents to not rashly target him. Don't touch the butt of tiger. Otherwise, you might end up losing the rice you used to steal a chicken. After the execution was over, this matter came to an end. Ouyang Shaw didn't want to find out who the mastermind was. As long as this mission wasn't over, the other party would show their tails sooner or later. After the storm, the camp returned to peace. As for those who couldn't sleep well, that was another matter. The second half of the night was calm. The next morning, the camp was bustling again. Last night's disturbance didn't affect the lords' enthusiasm at all. Some of the more impatient ones had already led their troops out of the camp and into the vast desert. Ouyang Shaw didn't stay for long. He met up with Zhang Liao's troops and the dragon-seeking acupuncture unit and left the camp. Early in the morning, the sun rose. The vast desert was calm. The undulating desert was as gentle as a woman's boudoir. With that, the lord's fear of grand desert lessened somewhat. Huyin Xiu was the only one who immediately entered the desert. Sometimes he would observe the terrain of the desert, and sometimes he would look up at the sky. He didn't look relaxed. Ouyang Shuo rode on his warhorse and looked around. Because they had just entered the desert, the troops didn't spread out. There were mutant troops in front, behind, left, and right. The sharp-eyed Ouyang Shuo noticed that some of the lords were looking at them strangely. He had faintly felt this kind of gaze last night. This morning, the feeling of being watched became more and more intense. After careful observation, it wasn't hard to see that there were at least 6 troops trailing far behind them. They were probably being watched by someone. Big brother, something's wrong. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit wasn't a fool. He also noticed something was wrong and came to Ouyang Shuo's side. Ouyang Shuo nodded. Yes, something's wrong. But why? There's no reason to fight us now. It won't do them any good. There are people who would do such a thankless thing. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit didn't hide his doubts. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be. But if someone is deliberately provoking us, then it's hard to say. Ouyang Shuo slowly sorted out his thoughts and said ambiguously, You mean Di Chun and the others? The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit immediately understood. Besides them, who else likes to play these little tricks? Ouyang Shuo said, What could it be that made these lords dare to take such a risk? The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit muttered to himself. Then he said slowly, Could it be something that could be exchanged for military resource points? Ouyang Shuo nodded approvingly and said with a smile, Most likely. Not to mention other things, just the exquisite military map was enough to make these lords scramble for it. Without this map, they basically had no chance of winning. That was why these lords were willing to take such a risk. How despicable. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit didn't hide his disdain for Di Chun and the others. However, Ouyang Shuo remained indifferent. He was afraid that Di Chun and the others would be fooled by their own cleverness. How could a lord who could squeeze his territory into the top 50 in China be a fool? Yes, Ouyang Shuo and the others had military resource points, but didn't Di Chun and the others have military resource points? It wasn't hard to come up with a conclusion. Compared to them, the 3 allied armies of the Shanghai Alliance were even more difficult to deal with. Presumably, Di Chun and the others had also realized this point. When they set off in the morning, Ouyang Shuo especially looked around, but he didn't see the 3 from the Yanhuang Alliance. They should have already left. Even so, Ouyang Shuo believed that there must be a group of rats following behind them. The current situation was that the 2 allied armies had become the targets of the other lords. This mission is getting more and more interesting. Ouyang Shuo smiled. The dragon-seeking acupuncture unit was dumbfounded. He didn't know how his big brother could still smile at this time. Scratching his head, he could only bitterly return to the army. Just like that, Ouyang Shuo led his troops forward slowly in the vast desert with a group of people following behind him. To the lords behind them, they didn't want to rob them directly. If they could just follow the army of Shanghai City, why would they bother? Of course, if someone was willing to be the vanguard, it would be a different story. For the entire morning, the atmosphere was unusually harmonious. The mutant army had truly entered the depths of the desert. Looking around, there was only endless desert in front of them. Apart from sand, there was only sand in their eyes. At the beginning, their curiosity towards the desert had turned into boredom and boredom. Especially as time passed, the temperature of the desert became higher and higher. By noon, the scorching sun was already high in the sky. The scorching sun scorched the earth, making it hard for people to raise their spirits. These mutant armies had no experience in fighting in the desert. It was even their first time seeing the desert. Therefore, under such circumstances, the entire team seemed rather listless. Even Little White was a little listless. Last night, Ouyang Shuo had checked on Little White's injuries. Luckily, they were only superficial wounds. After applying medicine on them, Little White's body was fine. Marquis, something's wrong. Suddenly, Huyin Xiu, who had been silent all this time, came to Ouyang Shuo's side. What's wrong? Ouyang Shuo asked. Looking at the situation, I'm afraid that a sandstorm will come soon. Huyin Xiu reported the bad news. Hearing this, Ouyang Shuo looked up at the sky and saw that the sky was high and the clouds were light. He couldn't see anything strange at all. Of course, Hu Yanxiu was a professional, so Ouyang Shua naturally followed his advice. He immediately ordered the army to shrink their formation. "Can we find a place to hide from the wind?" Ouyang Shua asked. Facing a sandstorm, it was obviously the worst plan. Chapter 583. Marquis, there is a desert not far ahead. We can temporarily avoid the sandstorm. Hu Yanxiu was indeed a living map of the desert. He had been paying attention to the inconspicuous coordinates in the desert and was very clear about the surrounding environment. He immediately pointed out a clear path for the army. Ouyang Shua felt relieved when he heard this. Just based on this point alone, 250 campaign resource points were well spent. He immediately let Hu Yanxiu lead the way, and the army began to speed up, trying to find a place to rest in the desert before the sandstorm arrived. The people at the back also wanted to follow. This time, Ouyang Shua was not so easy to deal with. He let the divine martial guards guard the rear and shot a wave of arrows at the back as a warning. With this warning, the enemy did not dare to approach. They only arranged for a few spies to watch from afar. As for the majority of the army, they slowly followed behind. In the eyes of the feudal lords, there was still a long way to go. As long as they knew the whereabouts of the Shanghai City army, they would not be afraid of getting lost in the desert. They did not know that Ouyang Shua was already using the sandstorm to dig a big hole for them. Half an hour later, they saw the desert. Ouyang Shua ordered the army to dismount and pretend to rest on the spot. In reality, the army was already secretly setting up a formation. At this moment, the sky of the desert suddenly became turbid. The terrifying sandstorm arrived as expected. The previously calm desert was suddenly filled with dust and smoke. Even further away, a sandstorm that blotted out the sky and covered the sun swept over like a stormy sea. The beautiful sky instantly became pitch black. Only the howling of the wind could be heard in the entire world. It was only at this moment that the mutant army at the back realized that the sandstorm was coming. Immediately, they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. They wanted to hide in the desert like the army of Shanghai City, but it was already too late. This was because in front of the desert, 9,000 elite cavalrymen were already waiting in formation. Any enemy that charged over would face a wave of arrows. This time, the mutant army was immediately in a desperate situation. Forward or backward, it was a dead end. The violent sandstorm swept over at a speed that left a trail of dust in its wake. The people in the desert were instantly thrown off their feet. The mutant army finally saw the violent side of the desert. Even the army of Shanghai City, which was backed by the desert, was struggling to hold on. If they were not careful, they would be swept away by the sandstorm. All of a sudden, everyone was thrown off their feet. Ouyang Shua was surrounded by the army, unable to open his eyes. As far as the eye could see, all around him was a gray and hazy sandstorm. It was as if he was in the midst of doomsday. From time to time, miserable shrieks could be heard. Every minute and second felt like an eternity. In the face of the mighty power of heaven and earth, a person seemed so insignificant. After an unknown period of time, the rolling sandstorm finally swept past and disappeared into the distance. Ouyang Shua struggled to open his eyes. His entire body was covered in sand, and this was already very fortunate. Even further away, the mutant army that was unfortunately caught in the sandstorm had already been scattered. In Ouyang Shua's heart, there was no trace of pity in his heart. Where are the generals? Ouyang Shua took a deep breath and shouted. Here! Wang Feng, Zhang Liao, and Qin Xiong stepped forward. Before they set off, it was already agreed that Ouyang Shua would be the sole commander of the army. He alone was to command the three armies. Therefore, Zhang Liao and Qin Xiong did not dare to be negligent at this moment. Immediately reorganize the troops. While the enemy is scattered and unstable, completely annihilate them. Ouyang Shua unsheathed his sword and pointed it forward. Yes, General. The three generals' blood was instantly boiling. They liked this kind of direct and efficient battle. As for taking advantage of the enemy's precarious position, this was war, not child's play. It was not a place to talk about propriety and honor. After a while, the army was already in formation. Kill. Under the leadership of the three generals, the army turned out in full force. Ouyang Shual, under the protection of his personal guards, was in the middle of the command and did not attack. For the mutant army, it was simply a bad start. A sandstorm had caused them to lose more than half of their soldiers. Most of the soldiers did not die, but were scattered by the sandstorm and buried under the sand dunes. If they were rescued in time, they would be able to gather the remnants of the army. Unfortunately, Ouyang Shual did not give them this opportunity. The mighty army of Shanghai City charged forward with a thunderous rumble. To these lords, at this moment, it was as if the sky was about to collapse. They regretted it so much. They had been bewitched by Di, Chun, and the others, and this was what they deserved. There was no suspense in this sudden attack in the desert. In less than 2 hours, the 5 or 6 mutant armies that followed behind the army of Shanghai City were almost completely annihilated. Even the enemies who were fleeing in all directions were chased down and cut down from their horses. In front of the desolate desert, there were piles of corpses. Gusts of sand blew, and the corpses were quickly buried by the sand dunes. A month later, who would know that a great battle had taken place here? Only the white bones buried deep under the sand dunes silently recounted this unknown history. This was the desert. It was calm, violent, warm, and emotionless. No matter which side it was the truest side of it. What made Ouyang Shua's expression strange was that during the battle, he actually saw his contribution points rising rapidly. Are there contribution points for killing soldiers of the same camp? Oh, Gaia is really two-faced. In this battle, there are no camps at all. As long as they are not from the same territory, they're all enemies. In the end, there can only be one person who wins. Ouyang Shua began to understand Gaia's intentions. In this way, the battle between the lords would probably become more and more cruel. Even if he could not subdue Hua Tsubing in the end, it would be good to gain some contribution points and earn some merit points. After the battle, because they were in a hurry, Ouyang Shua did not clean up the battlefield and immediately led his troops to set off. While the sun had not completely set, the army could still travel a bit further. Evening was the best time to march. At this time, the temperature was pleasant, neither too hot nor too cold. If it really came to night, they could only spend the night in their tents. After shaking off the tail, the army easily set off. In the great desert, the lonely smoke rises and the long river sets as the round sun. Looking at the orange sun, Ouyang Shua could not help but think of this poem that had been passed down for thousands of years. Did the poet Wang Wei feel the same way back then? Ouyang Shua did not know. As the afterglow of the setting sun shone on the golden sand dunes. After marching for a day, the army chose a suitable location under Huyin Xiu's guidance and set up camp in the desert. As soon as the army stopped, Huyin Xiu led a group of people out to fetch water. The water sacks that the cavalrymen were equipped with could only last for 2 days if used sparingly. The battle during the day had consumed even more water than before. Therefore, they had to quickly replenish their water supply during the rest time. Otherwise, they would not be able to march tomorrow. Ouyang Shua could not imagine how they would have successfully found water in the vast desert if they had not recruited Huyin Xiu. Di Chun and the others were probably the same, right? He just didn't know if they had avoided the sandstorm during the day. Ouyang Shua thought maliciously. The next 2 days were calm and peaceful. They did not even see a single mutant army. Ouyang Shua estimated that after entering the desert, the surviving mutant army would have already dispersed. Marquis, we will be out of the desert in 3 days. After setting up camp, Huyin Xiu reported the journey to Ouyang Shua as usual. Ouyang Shua smiled and nodded. Thank you for your hard work. He was not just being polite. It was all thanks to Huyin Xiu's guidance that the army had been able to advance so smoothly. Huyin Xiu had been able to find water almost every day. The tens of thousands of soldiers had never stopped drinking water. It had to be said that this was no small miracle. Apart from drinking water, they also discovered the traces left behind by the main Han army. This made Ouyang Shua very excited. When he thought that Hua Xubing's department was not far ahead, Ouyang Shua could not help but feel excited. Accidents always happened at the most unexpected times. That night was undoubtedly a test that was neither too big nor too small for the army of Shanghai City. Two figures suddenly appeared on a sand dune far away from the camp. These two people were dressed in tattered clothes, but they were tightly wrapped and had their faces covered. Their dusty clothes were difficult to detect in the desert. They had been following the army of Shanghai City for more than a day. Big brother, look at their formation and the layout of their camp. They don't look like ordinary Han soldiers, one of them said in a hoarse voice. He's not ordinary, a slightly older man replied in a deep voice. Then, why don't we retreat? The hoarse lackey hesitated. Retreat? I want to retreat too. The older man's voice was filled with bitterness. It's a pity that we're out of food. If we don't do something soon, we'll be starving. Want to be too risky? The younger man was still a little afraid. To these desert bandits, the Han army was an existence that they could not afford to offend. If they were to poke a hornet's nest, they would be killed by the Han army. Therefore, it had become an unspoken rule among the desert bandits not to rob the official army. Of course, there was always an exception. For example, when they were at their wits' end. During this period of time, the Han army frequently attacked the Xiongnu, cutting off the trade routes. The desert bandits did not have an easy time. At the end of the day, these bandits were also living a life of blood. If he really wanted them to die, he would do anything crazy. As a result, a group of desert bandits had their eyes on the army of Shanghai City. What they wanted were the military rations that the cavalrymen carried. When the desert bandits noticed these magical pills, they could not help but drool. They did not make a move because they were gathering reinforcements. This time, the two strongest groups of desert bandits in the desert were going to work together for a big operation. The two men on the sand dune were only in charge of monitoring the army. The main force, which consisted of tens of thousands of desert bandits, was still secretly gathering behind them. The time of the operation was set to be tonight. Chapter 584. The desert bandits chose to attack at around 8 o'clock at night. At this time, the soldiers had already gone to bed. The entire camp was quiet. Only the night wind whistled past, blowing the bonfire outside the tent up and down, making it erratic. Looking at the starry sky, the Milky Way hung upside down and the bright moon hung high, together with the vast desert. It gave people a sense of loneliness and serenity. Who's there? The soldiers in charge of guarding the perimeter noticed the flickering torches in the distance. Pucci. What answered him was a sharp arrow. The desert bandits that had been hiding for a long time finally bared their fangs and chose to bite. 40 to 50,000 desert bandits came from all directions, surrounding the campsite so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Tens of thousands of torches illuminated the desert as if it were daytime. The soldiers on guard fell to the ground one after another after being hit by the arrows. The muffled scolding alerted the patrolling team in the camp. Then, the entire camp was awakened. In an instant, the silence disappeared and was replaced by a wave of clamor. Ouyang Shua had already given strict orders to march in the desert. Other than the patrolling team, all the soldiers were to sleep without taking off their armors. Their weapons were placed next to their pillows to ensure that they could join the battle at any time. He was guarding against the other mutant armies. Unexpectedly, the desert bandits came instead of the mutant armies. What's going on? Ouyang Shua held his sword and walked out of the tent. Reporting to the marquis, it's the desert bandits. The captain of the guards, Chen Damong, the most loyal guard, came to the commander's tent immediately. Desert bandits? Ouyang Shua was startled. How dare they? Ouyang Shua's voice was not loud, but anyone could feel the murderous intent in it. Guards! Ouyang Shua drew his sword again. Here! Attack with me! Ouyang Shua was ready to take action himself. Yes, the entire campsite had already fallen into a mess of killing and was in a complete mess. It was impossible to organize a battle formation or set up any rules. The only way was to fight the desert bandits with their swords and spears. They would kill them until they were defeated. Because of that, Ouyang Shua did not bother to think about commanding the troops at all. He raised his sword and led his personal guards into the battlefield. Needless to say, the desert bandits' timing was impeccable. Desert bandits were best at fighting at night. Especially in the Great Desert, they were the local tyrants and were familiar with the roads. Even if they moved at night, there were no obstacles. On the other hand, the Allied army was suddenly attacked. Although they were not in a sorry state and were defeated by the enemy in a single strike, they were still in a hurry to fight. More importantly, the 9,000-strong Allied army was composed entirely of cavalry. Now, the knights had no choice but to engage in close combat with the desert bandits, abandoning the charge that they were best at. This was a great taboo for military strategists. Fortunately, there were still 3,000 divine guards at the forefront. The divine martial guards were experts in both infantry and cavalry. Mounted, they were invincible cavalry. Dismounted, they were the most valiant warriors. Kill! Some desert bandits noticed Ouyang Shua's group and quickly surrounded them. Ouyang Shua laughed coldly as he spun the crimson sky sword and slashed out with a backhand, chopping a desert bandit to death in a straightforward and efficient manner. Then, he slid into the middle of the desert bandits and engaged in close combat. The killing sword was born for the battlefield. How could ordinary desert bandits be Ouyang Shua's match? Especially the desert bandits' equipment. Using simple to describe them was overestimating them. They were simply too shabby. Looking around, there wasn't a single piece of metal armor. Their bodies were loose and all covered in leather armor, some even just plain cloth clothes. Ouyang Shua couldn't imagine who gave them the courage to attack the army. Such defense was no different from tofu in front of the Crimson Sky sword. In an instant, Ouyang Shua led his personal guards and killed everyone on the battlefield. In a short while, there were already dozens of corpses of desert bandits beneath Ouyang Shua's feet. When the surrounding warriors saw this, their morale was greatly boosted. The leader of the desert bandits wasn't a fool and immediately noticed the changes on the battlefield. Ordinary men couldn't even get close to Ouyang Shua. They wanted to shoot arrows from the back. The personal guards seemed to be standing casually, but in reality, they had already surrounded Ouyang Shua tightly. The desert bandits finally saw how terrifying an elite army was. It was a world of difference compared to the caravan guards they had killed before. After the initial panic, even if they didn't have the advantage in numbers, the army launched an orderly counterattack. The soldiers were organized into platoons and moved about freely on the battlefield. On the other hand, once the desert bandits started fighting, they fought for themselves and became a mess. The situation gradually became disadvantageous to the desert bandits. A trace of regret flashed in the heart of the leader of the desert bandits. Helpless, the arrow on the bow had to be fired. The leader of the desert bandits was prepared to personally make an appearance. His target was Ouyang Shua. He gathered a group of the most elite desert bandits and pounced towards Ouyang Shua. Motherf asterisk her, is there finally a tough one? Chen Damong said with a sinister expression as he waved his saber and chopped off the head of a desert bandit. Looking at his appearance and tone, he was more like a bandit than the desert bandits. This personal guard captain wasn't someone to be trifled with. Under Ouyang Shua's personal guidance, his combat strength increased day by day. Even Wang Feng had to fight over 100 rounds against Chen Damong before he had the confidence to take him down. This time, the leader of the desert bandits had met his match. The two burly men collided, and it was hard to tell who would gain the upper hand. Ouyang Shua was on the battlefield, but he didn't think of killing the leader to show off his bravery. To him, this battle was the best place to temper his killing sword. Even elite desert bandits couldn't withstand the sharpness of the killing sword. Especially towards the end of the battle, blood mist condensed on the blade of the Scarlet Knight's sword, which was even more terrifying. Clang! The Scarlet Knight sword clashed with a longsword. Something's wrong. As soon as they clashed, Ouyang Shua felt that the desert bandits opposite him weren't simple. The other party's swords seemed soft and powerless, but the angle of attack was extremely tricky. Moreover, the sword was extremely fast, and every move was fatal. It's an expert. Ouyang Shuo raised his head and glanced at the other party. It was just an ordinary-looking desert bandit. Humph! Ouyang Shuo snorted coldly and raised his sword to meet the bandit again. He didn't believe that there was someone among the desert bandits who could contend against him. The more they exchanged blows, the more Ouyang Shuo felt uncomfortable. The enemy in front of him was simply the most cunning fox, or rather, a venomous snake. He relied on his agility and didn't fight head-on with Ouyang Shuo. He constantly retreated into the crowd and used it as cover. When Ouyang Shuo wasn't paying attention, he would suddenly attack again. Every time, Ouyang Shuo would break out in cold sweat. How despicable! Ouyang Shuo was somewhat infuriated by the other party. The Scarlet Knight, sword in his hand, became sharper and sharper, and every move was fatal. Since you want to hide, then I'll kill all the enemies in front of me. Ouyang Shuo thought to himself. He couldn't be blamed for being so conceited. Ever since he mastered the inner cannon of the Yellow Emperor and cultivated it into a killing sword, Ouyang Shuo had rarely suffered such a loss. Even if it was Qiyu, he still dared to raise his sword and charge forward. But now, he had been tricked by a nameless person. How could he not be angry? The Scarlet Knight's sword seemed to have sensed Ouyang Shuo's thoughts and seemed to be even more excited. Ouyang Shuo discovered that he could actually clearly feel the feelings that the Scarlet Knight, sword spirit, transmitted to him. Go on a killing spree? Ouyang Shuo muttered to himself. All right, as you wish. This time, Ouyang Shuo circulated the true essence in his body. Golden true essence quietly covered the blade of the Scarlet Knight's sword. Gold and red intertwined and reflected off each other. With the assistance of true essence, the Scarlet Knight sword became even sharper. Before it even got close, the enemy felt waves of sharpness that were like needles stabbing them. The bandit's weapon was immediately cut into two when it came into contact with the Scarlet Knight's sword. Such might was simply unparalleled. Ouyang Shuo seemed to be killing indiscriminately, but in reality, more than half of his energy was secretly guarding against the bandit that sneak attacked him earlier. This time, Ouyang Shuo wanted to make the other party suffer a crushing defeat. Sure enough, when the bandit with an ordinary appearance saw that Ouyang Shuo was a killing spree, a trace of a cold smile flashed on the corners of his mouth. He quietly circled around Ouyang Shuo's back, and the long sword in his hand pierced towards Ouyang Shuo's heart like a venomous snake. I've finally caught you. Ouyang Shuo smiled instead. His feet moved, and his body suddenly leaned to the side, dodging the other party's attack. Before he completely turned around, the Scarlet Knight's sword in his hand had already stuck to the other party's long sword and slid past. A sword light flashed, and the Scarlet Knight's sword seemed to have intelligence as it directly pierced into the other party's body. Only at this time did Ouyang Shuo turn around. Once he succeeded, Ouyang Shuo naturally wouldn't show mercy. The Scarlet Knight sword turned and shook, completely shattering the other party's 5 viscera and 6 bowels. Woo! The bandit stared at Ouyang Shuo with an incredulous gaze as he fell to the ground and died. Great leader! At this time, the surrounding bandits cried out in alarm. So that's how it is. Ouyang Shuo suddenly understood. This ordinary-looking bandit was the leader of another bandit organization. When the first leader was fighting with Chun Damong, he quietly snuck to Ouyang Shuo's side and prepared to launch a sneak attack. He didn't expect that in the end, he still lost his life under the Scarlet Knight's sword. Once the leader died, the bandits instantly lost their will to fight. The entire battlefield began to loosen up. When the leader who was fighting with Chun Damong saw this, his face darkened, but he was also unusually courageous. He blocked Chun Damong's broadsword and shouted loudly, "Retreat!" Turning around, he disappeared from the battlefield under the escort of his trusted subordinates. Bastard! Seeing this, Chun Damong stomped his feet in anger, feeling very humiliated. As the leader retreated, the remaining bandits retreated like the tide. The bandits were worthy of being the local tyrants. The army of Shanghai City was just about to mount their war horses and prepare to chase out of the camp. As far as the eye could see, in the vast desert, where could they still see the figures of the bandits? They really came and went without a trace. In the end, the army could only resentfully give up. As for Ouyang Shua, he casually picked up a token. This token was dropped by the leader of the bandits after his death. Other than that, there was nothing else. After the battle, Ouyang Shua's battle contribution points increased by tens of thousands again. Chapter 585. After the battle, the three generals came to Ouyang Shua's tent and reported the casualties of the battle to him. Although they managed to repel the desert bandits, the Allied forces also suffered a lot of casualties. Both Lingxi City and Dragon-Seeking City had lost more than 500 men each. Even the most elite divine martial guards lost more than 100 people. The savagery of the desert bandits was not just for show. After everyone dispersed, Ouyang Shua finally had time to look at the token. Campaign token, an unknown campaign token that can only be used in specific places. The attributes of the token puzzled Ouyang Shua. He did not know how to use this token. The only information was that the token could only be used on the battle map. As for the rest, he knew nothing. There were too many mysteries about this battle that Ouyang Shua could not understand. The setting of the battle between Gaia and the desert completely overturned the previous battle settings. Ouyang Shua could no longer gain the upper hand like in the previous battles. Instead, he was passive and faced endless troubles. Scorching sun, sandstorm, desert bandits, Gaia's tests came one after another, making people unable to rest in peace. Based on the current situation, there would be no more than 10 mutant armies that could walk out of the desert in the end. The next day, the army set off again. Perhaps it was because they had killed the two largest groups of desert bandits in the desert. The rest of the army's journey was smooth. On the afternoon of the 5th day of the battle, the army finally passed through the desert and entered the grassland. The barren and deathly silent desert was connected to the lush green grassland. It was abrupt and natural. One side represented death, while the other represented life. Two completely different hues, in this place, perfectly intersected. The boundary between life and death was so clear. Even so, Ouyang Shua did not feel happy at all as he looked at the endless grassland. Gaia was not a philanthropist. Walking out of the desert was just Gaia's entrance test for the overlords. The real test was still on this seemingly harmless grassland, because countless Xiongnu tribes lived here. They were scattered all over the place, making it impossible to guard against them. The mutant army would face an even harsher test. At that time, they would have to kill each other. Under the double test, only the strongest could reach the end. How could a god-level martial general be so easily subdued? Pass down my order. Have all the officers and soldiers raise their spirits and don't slack off. Ouyang Shua ordered. Yes, sir. The messenger turned around and left. Suddenly changing from a harsh environment to a comfortable one, it was very easy for the soldiers to slack off. This was human nature. If they slacked off, what awaited them would be death. Unfortunately, the cruel rules of war forced the army to move slowly and cautiously. Because this was an extreme race, being cautious meant falling behind. Falling behind meant that they had no fate with becoming a divine general. Therefore, the army had to maintain the necessary vigilance while marching quickly. Although Ouyang Shua was cautious, his enemies were more cunning than him. The army had just bypassed a small hill when the rumbling sound of horse hooves came from all directions. Accompanying the galloping of the horses was a series of whistling sounds. One could tell that it was not a friendly greeting. Not good, we're surrounded. The troops responsible for guarding the perimeter immediately discovered the enemy and waved their flags. Considering that they were marching in the territory of the Han, coupled with the fact that they did not have enough men, it was impossible for them to defeat the Han army. The troops patrolling the perimeter did not spread out too much in case they attracted the Xiongnu. On the other hand, the main force maintained their battle formation and did not spread out too much. In any case, the grassland was boundless and there was no need to worry about the narrow roads. Ouyang Shua led the divine martial guards to the front of the army. acting as the vanguard. The middle troops were Qin Xiong's troops, while the rear troops were guarded by the prudent Zhang Liao. Everyone, don't panic. Hold your ground. Ouyang Shuo was calm. He thought that the ambushers were the Xiongnu's army. Sooner or later, there would be a battle between the two. The earlier they met, the earlier they could be free of worry. This time, Ouyang Shuo had miscalculated. In a short while, the information of the battlefield was sent to Ouyang Shuo. The ambushers were actually the mutant army. Initial estimates said that there were no less than 30,000 enemies. This meant that there were at least 10 lords participating in this attack. 10. Ouyang Shuo was bewildered. According to his calculations, there would not be more than 10 lords that could walk out of the desert. In other words, all of the surviving lords had participated in this siege. Needless to say, there must be someone behind this. As for who it was, it went without saying. Ouyang Shuo led his personal guards up a small hill nearby and looked around. 30,000 cavalrymen surged toward the allied army from all directions, giving off an imposing aura that could devour mountains and rivers. At the northernmost side, where the army was heading, Ouyang Shuo noticed the army of Kill Ripper. The Mongolian warhorses and scimitars were too easy to recognize. At the front of the army was Zhou Yafu, a famous general. Next to Zhou Yafu was a group of Han soldiers. Upon closer inspection, they were the army of the main camp. On the left, Di Qin's troops were faintly discernible. On the right, the flag of the battle wolves fluttered in the wind. When Ouyang Shuo saw this, he suddenly understood. When he saw the three of them, everything that didn't make sense seemed to be explained. It was obvious that this was a meticulously planned plot. The goal was to get rid of Ouyang Shuo's group and get rid of their biggest competitor. Ouyang Shuo couldn't figure out how Di Qin and the others managed to convince the other lords to put down their grudges and work together to attack the army of Shanghai City. Because what they did was tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. Who didn't know how ambitious Di Qin and the others were? The biggest possibility was that these leaders had already obtained substantial benefits in advance, which was why they gave up and cooperated with the Yan-Huang alliance in order to achieve Di Qin and the others' plans. For example, they were bribed with money. Thinking about the time limit exchange that had just ended, it wasn't hard to imagine that Di Qin and the others were spending money like dirt. Another suspicious point was that the other party had come prepared. They purposely guarded the path that the army of Shanghai City had to pass through, which caught Ouyang Shuo off guard. The army of Shanghai City had the living map of the desert, Huyin Xiu, to lead them out of the desert so smoothly. Then what about the army of Kill Ripper and the others? It was beyond Ouyang Shuo's expectations that they could get out of the desert before the army of Shanghai City. Other than having a guide, the only other possibility was Zhou Yafu. Thinking about the Han army beside Zhou Yafu, Ouyang Shuo's face turned cold. He never expected that Zhou Yafu would be able to influence the Han army in this era and even influence the stance of the Han army. He had miscalculated. All these factors caused Shanghai City to be in a difficult situation. Big brother, what do we do now? Xuanlong, acupoint master, came from the middle of the army and galloped over. Let's split up, Ouyang Shuo said. In the current situation, they didn't have much of a chance of winning. 8,000 against 30,000. Ouyang Shuo had confidence in the divine martial guards, but not in the other two armies. As a result, they were equally matched with the enemy troops opposite them. As for commanding the troops, Lin Pe, Zhou Yafu, Tiandan, and the rest were even better, adding on the fact that the situation was disadvantageous to Shanghai City. If they fought recklessly, they would suffer heavy losses. Ouyang Shuo wouldn't act rashly. His main goal was to complete the battle mission. As for fighting with Di Qin and the others, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Ouyang Shuo didn't want to let Di Qin and the others reap the benefits just because of a momentary rush. Therefore, the best way was to split up and break out of the encirclement before the enemy completely surrounded them. Of course, Ouyang Shuo had his own selfish motives, but he did not want others to know about it. Ouyang Shuo called Zhang Liao over, and the three of them agreed on a meeting place. Then, it was the direction to break through. Ouyang Shua took up the heavy responsibility, and the army of Shanghai City would break through. Without a doubt, this was the direction that the enemy's defense was the tightest, and it was also the hardest bone. Sunlong City and Lingxi City would break through to the left and right respectively. How many troops would be left would be up to fate. Big brother, take care. Sunlong City cupped his fists and left. Marquis, take care. Zhang Liao led his troops and left. The battlefield was ever-changing, and there was no room for hesitation. After the discussion, the three armies started to break through. Ouyang Shua patted his horse and came to the front of the divine martial guards. He pulled out the Scarlet Knight sword. "Boys, trample them flat for me and carve out a path of blood." Ouyang Shua shouted loudly, "Kill! Kill! Kill!" What responded to him was an earth-shattering roar. The divine martial guards were fearless. Although Ouyang Shua chose to break through, he didn't want to let the enemy have an easy time. The target he chose to break out of the encirclement was none other than the Killing Destruction Army, which was also the most elite unit in front. It wasn't that Ouyang Shua was willful, but he had the confidence and consideration. Even Zhou Yafu probably wouldn't have thought of breaking through like this. Since that was the case, their chances of winning were higher. The 3,000 divine martial guards, under Ouyang Shua's personal command, boldly charged. If one looked down from the sky, they would see a shocking scene. The front, middle, and rear troops of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas were instantly divided into three groups. The front troops continued to charge forward, the middle troops turned to the left, and the rear troops resolutely went to the right. The three armies were like three sharp arrows, piercing through the sky. In front of them was the densely packed Alliance troops. This was a great breakthrough that concerned life and death. Only the brave would win in a narrow path. There was no need for any words to serve as a foil. The cavalry of both sides launched the fiercest charge at each other at almost the same time. On the vast prairie, in the territory of the Xiongnu, in the paradise of cavalry, all the surviving mutant troops along Hua Tsubing's route were involved in this chaotic battle. This was a confrontation between cavalry and cavalry, a confrontation between elites and elites. The sabers were unsheathed, and the war horses neighed. The soldiers' blood began to boil in an instant. A battle that would decide the fate of the lords had officially begun. Chapter 586. How terrifying was the charge of 3,000 divine guards. Only its enemies had the right to speak. Military Kill Ripper stared at the approaching divine martial guards and felt the murderous aura coming at him. His expression was solemn. He didn't think that Don't Say Wooey would choose his side to break through. In reality, the entire situation, from the plan to kill Little White, to the leaking of the battle resource points, to the successful exit of the desert, and finally to this shocking battle, Military Killbreaker was the true leader. Even Di Chun and Zhang Lang were only supporting characters. This allowed Army Kill Ripper, who had been sullen all this time, to feel proud and elated. Especially since his opponent this time was Army Kill Ripper's mortal enemy, not Say No Clothes. However, the development of the battle did not go according to the script that Military Kill Ripper had planned. Originally, Army Kill Ripper had been prepared to fight a tough battle. An army of 30,000 was ganging up on 9,000, no, 8,000 now. No matter how he looked at it, victory was in his grasp. Even if he couldn't kill them all, he could at least cripple them. With Zhou Yafu's existence, Military Kill Ripper had become Hua Tsubing's most powerful competitor. He didn't expect Who Says Wooey to be so spineless. He chose to retreat as soon as they came into contact. Damn it, that's not how the script was written, okay? Military Kill Ripper was exasperated. In just a short while, the two armies were already facing each other. The two high-speed charging cavalry clashed with the momentum of a thunderbolt. In an instant, everyone was thrown off their feet. The Divine Martial Guard was unreasonably strong. In the face of absolute power, a slight advantage in numbers was nothing. Under Ouyang Shua's personal command, the 3,000 Divine Guards formed an indestructible and fearless force as they charged into the enemy. No one could stop them along the way. 3,000 lances moved at high speed, carving out a bloody path in the enemy's formation. Military Kill Ripper was shocked when he saw this. Ouyang Shuo was expressionless. He would be lying if he said he wasn't angry after being schemed against by Military Kill Ripper and the others. He had to vent this anger. His target was Military Kill Ripper. Even if he had a breakthrough, Ouyang Shuo would make Military Kill Ripper suffer. After successfully breaking into the enemy's camp, Ouyang Shuo's ambition grew once more. This time, he was prepared to teach Military Killer an unforgettable lesson. "Follow me." Ouyang Shuo patted his horse and charged forward on the left. The first to catch up was the personal guards led by Chun Damming. Wang Feng anxiously led the Divine Martial Guard to follow. Such a difficult change of direction was extremely easy for the Divine Martial Guards. This change in direction caused Ouyang Shuo's target to be completely exposed. To the left of the Divine Martial Guards, Zhou Yafu was commanding the Han army under the protection of the guards. Ouyang Shuo actually wanted to capture Zhou Yafu. "How dare you say you have no clothes?" Seeing this from afar, Military Kill Ripper couldn't help but widen his eyes in anger. A trace of panic flashed across his face. At this critical moment, Army Kill Ripper immediately led his troops to rush over to help. Unfortunately, the battlefield was in chaos. It was extremely difficult for Military Kill Ripper to rush over. The speed of the Divine Martial Guard charge was extremely sharp, even though the army in front of Zhou Yafu defended with all their might, wanting to cover their commander to escape. Unfortunately, they weren't strong enough. After a while, Ouyang Shuo led his troops to Zhou Yafu. Zhou Yafu died. Ouyang Shuo didn't hide his killing intent. As a famous general, Zhou Yafu had personally quelled the rebellion of 7 countries. How could he be an ordinary person? Seeing the Divine Martial Guard charging at him, he wasn't afraid at all. "Soldiers, follow me to kill the enemy." Zhou Yafu unsheathed his sword and took the initiative to attack. Yes, the surrounding Han army was also iron-blooded men. "Come at me." Ouyang Shuo swung his azure lightning and caught up. This time, he wanted to kill Zhou Yafu personally. A famous general? Ouyang Shuo didn't even put him in his eyes on the battlefield. As long as they were enemies, they would be mortal enemies. Ouyang Shuo cherished talent, but he wouldn't make a mistake at this time. Clang! The Crimson Firmament sword clashed with Zhou Yafu's sword. Zhou Yafu's real name was Jiang. This sword was powerful and came from a tricky angle. Crimson Firmament sword. Ouyang Shuo was shocked, but Zhou Yafu let out a cry. The Crimson Firmament sword was the sword of Liu Bang. As a famous general of the Western Han dynasty, Zhou Yafu recognized the Crimson Firmament sword in Ouyang Shuo's hand. "It's the Crimson Firmament sword," Ouyang Shuo said, and thrust his sword out again. "How dare you use Emperor Gaozu's sword? How dare you?" Unexpectedly, Zhou Yafu was completely enraged, and his sword became more and more fierce. The sword in Zhou Yafu's hand was the most typical Han sword. Although it couldn't compare to a divine weapon like the Crimson Firmament sword, it was still a rare sword. His swordsmanship was also extraordinary. The two of them were actually evenly matched in this battle. Ouyang Shuo finally realized that an emperor general was a level higher than a monarch general. It was extremely difficult to quickly take down an emperor-level general. Moreover, Ouyang Shuo didn't have time to waste anymore. Not far away, Military Kill Ripper's eyes were red with anxiety as he led his troops to provide reinforcements. Once the Divine Martial Guard was surrounded, they wouldn't be able to break out. But Ouyang Shuo couldn't give up just like that. Clenching his teeth, Ouyang Shuo suddenly took out a talisman. Bloodthirst Talisman. After use, enter a bloodthirsty state. Battle power will be doubled and last for half an hour. After the bloodthirsty effect ends, the user will be weak for 2 days. Its effect was similar to the Berserk transformation of the barbarians. This Bloodthirst Talisman was dropped by the Wild Boar King when the system monsters attacked the city. All along, Ouyang Shuo had been busy with internal affairs and rarely went to the battlefield. This talisman, however, had never been put to use. It wasn't until his martial arts cultivation was successful that these talismans were kept by Ouyang Sha. Other than this bloodthirst talisman, there were also stamina talisman, military talisman, and other talismans. This time, Ouyang Sha was prepared to use the power of tools. Swish! The bloodthirst talisman was torn open by Ouyang Sha. A blood-red light burst out from the talisman and instantly disappeared into Ouyang Shua's body. Ouyang Shua's eyes suddenly turned red. He felt a strong and abundant power suddenly burst out from his body. The power of the bloodthirst talisman naturally didn't come out of thin air. It stimulated the potential in Ouyang Shua's body in a short period of time. That was why there was such a strong side effect. Kill. Ouyang Shua combined this power with the killing intent accumulated in his body and slashed out. Seeing this, Zhou Yafu immediately knew something was wrong and waited with rapt attention. Dang! The two swords collided once again. This time, Zhou Yafu felt that his entire arm was numb from the shock. He couldn't help but feel shocked. After the third system update, Gaia removed the player's level and replaced it with battle power. Ouyang Shua's battle power was at the upper silver level. After using the bloodthirst talisman, his battle power doubled, and he directly stepped into the lower gold level. From the silver level to the gold level, this was a qualitative improvement. Its power was naturally self-evident. At this time, Ouyang Shua was like a peerless god of death, suppressing Zhou Yafu to the point that he couldn't fight back. Ouyang Shua didn't relax at all. He used the Red Knight sword in his hand like it was his own arm. The sword moves of the killing sword were at his fingertips. The blood chi on the sword was stimulated by the bloodthirst talisman and became more and more intense. It seemed that Zhou Yafu couldn't hold on any longer. In the distance, military kill Ripper couldn't help cursing. How can you say you don't have clothes? Fool, don't be so arrogant. This shout contained internal force and could be said to be earth-shattering. Even the people on the battlefield on both sides also noticed it. Hearing this, Di Chun turned his head and happened to see this scene. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. To save or not to save? Logically speaking, they were now comrades and should be saved. But when he thought of military kill Ripper's arrogant expression these days, Di Chun felt very uncomfortable. Moreover, they were still rivals in subduing Huatsubing. If Zhou Yafu was really killed by He Wui, Di Chun would really be happy to see it happen. Thinking of this, Di Chun decided to wait and see. Master, if the lips die, the teeth will feel the cold. Lien Pe, who was standing by the side, saw through Di Chun's thoughts and reminded him. Yes. Hearing this, Di Chun was a little embarrassed. Old General Lien Pe was strong, but he didn't know what was good for him and was too honest. Simply put, his EQ was too low, and he didn't know how to carefully figure out his master's thoughts. Since that's the case, old general, please lend him a hand. Di Chun was Di Chun after all. Although he was a little dissatisfied, he wouldn't easily refuse the face of the #1 general. Yes, Lien Pe didn't care what Di Chun was thinking and rode away. However, even military kill Ripper couldn't save him in time, let alone Lien Pe, who was farther away. Of course, Lien Pe knew this. He spurred his horse forward for a distance, but then he stopped. He took out his bow and arrows and directly aimed at Ouyang Shua. Lien Pe's archery was also extraordinary. A sharp arrow suddenly broke through the air from hundreds of meters away. Pop! The sharp arrow actually hit Ouyang Shua's left arm. Gee! At this moment, Ouyang Shua was focused on fighting with Zhou Yafu. He didn't expect that an arrow would come from the sky. This time, Ouyang Shua was completely enraged. Ouyang Shua used his sword to block Zhou Yafu's sword, and then forcefully broke the sharp arrow in his left arm into two, leaving only the arrowhead that pierced into his flesh. Then, Ouyang Shua didn't care about his injury. He was determined to kill Zhou Yafu with his sword. The Red Knight sword slashed with great force and directly broke Zhou Yafu's sword. The power of a divine weapon was undoubtedly shown. Zhou Yafu was also shocked by Ouyang Shua's courage. His sword was broken, and he already had a bad feeling in his heart. 4. Killing generals. As expected, Ouyang Shuo launched his strongest attack. Zhou Yafu, who didn't have a sword in his hand, couldn't avoid it. Chapter 587. I'm not done with you. The moment Zhou Yafu fell to the ground, Military Kill Ripper let out his strongest curse. What about Ouyang Shuo? He turned a deaf ear to it. He picked up Zhou Yafu's General Soul and a book before turning around and preparing to leave the battlefield. He was afraid that if he stayed any longer, Military Kill Ripper would really eat him. There was another reason why Ouyang Shuo was in a hurry to leave. The Bloodthirst Seal only had half an hour of effect. If he didn't leave early, he would be at the mercy of others. Zhou Yafu's death caused a commotion among the surrounding troops. The Divine Martial Guards had an imposing manner. With the personal guards as the vanguard, they brazenly broke through the enemy's defensive line and left. Military Kill Ripper was flustered and exasperated as he personally led his troops to chase. However, even the elite Mongolian war horses were inferior to the Green Beetle horses. After chasing for more than 10 li, Military Kill Ripper saw the Divine Martial Guards disappear into the distance. He bit his lips in anger and blood flowed out. Ouyang Shuo was indeed the nemesis of Military Kill Ripper. Military Kill Ripper had single-handedly set up a trap for himself in the end. The cavalry of Azura City that had just started to improve was probably going to die midway after losing General Zhou Yafu. The rise of Azura City had come to an end. Military Kill Ripper was unlucky, but Ouyang Shuo didn't feel good either. Not long after charging out of the encirclement, the side effect of the Bloodthirst Seal started to take effect. Ouyang Shuo felt powerless and couldn't even hold the reins. If it wasn't for the green lightning, he would have fallen off the horse. Military Kill Ripper's pursuit made Ouyang Shuo's heart jump. Blessings never come in pairs, and misfortunes never come alone. The Divine Martial Guards had just gotten rid of Military Kill Ripper, and Ouyang Shuo was about to let out a sigh of relief when a group of Xiongnu cavalry suddenly appeared in front of them. When they saw the Divine Martial Guards, they didn't say anything and charged over aggressively. The Xiongnu cavalry were like wolves that had seen sheep, letting out fearless howls. Woo! Ayo! Walla! Even from far away, they could feel the ferocity and cruelty of the Xiongnu. Their curved blades glinted coldly. Upon closer inspection, some of the blades had traces of blood and flesh. This was a pack of real wolves. Ouyang Shuo once again had a clear understanding of his fortune source attribute. When a person was unlucky, even a mouthful of cold water would get stuck between the teeth. Although the Divine Martial Guards had performed valiantly in the previous breakout, they were outnumbered and suffered heavy losses. More than 600 Divine Martial Guards were completely buried on the battlefield. Facing the thousands of Xiongnu cavalry again, he would really have to fight with his life on the line. The problem was that they had no choice but to fight this battle. Firstly, the horses of the Xiongnu were of the best quality, and they were all skilled in horsemanship. It would be difficult for the Divine Martial Guard to get rid of the Xiongnu cavalry, like how they got rid of the military. Secondly, the great step was the territory of the Xiongnu. Even if the Divine Martial Guards could temporarily escape, they wouldn't be able to escape their pursuit. In the end, there had to be a battle. Moreover, it might even attract more Xiongnu cavalry. Therefore, the only way was to face the difficulties head-on and resolutely fight. It was just that Ouyang Shuo was completely powerless and could not personally command the army. In the following battle, Wang Feng was in charge of leading the charge. Strategist Zhao Kuo would replace Ouyang Shuo and command the army. His personal guards wouldn't participate in this battle. Their mission was to ensure Ouyang Shuo's safety. Ouyang Shuo, who had performed valiantly just now, had become a burden to the army. Thinking about it, there was nothing he could do. 2,000 Divine Martial Guards under Wang Feng's command clashed with 4,000 Xiongnu cavalry. The Xiongnu thought that they had encountered sheep, but they didn't know that they were a pack of tigers. This was a battle between a wolf and a tiger. Neither side could back down from the battle. The Xiongnu cavalry was mainly made up of light cavalry. This was especially so for a scattered division like this, which was even more so for light cavalry. They were nimble in battle and skilled in horsemanship. In a battle against the Han army, they had often relied on their nimble tactics to make the Han army suffer. This time, they had encountered a tough opponent. The cavalry tactics of the Divine Martial Guard might not be unparalleled, but it was rare. Generals like Luo Shixin and Shi Wansui, who were experts in cavalry tactics, had been invited to be instructors of the Divine Martial Guard. How could such a luxurious team of instructors be child's play? Even Wang Feng had been influenced by them and was well-versed in cavalry tactics. Zhao Kuo, the military advisor, was no stranger to cavalry tactics. In history, the state of Zhao was known for its elite cavalry, who were known for their clothing and archery. As a general of the state of Zhao, how could Zhao Kuo not know cavalry tactics? Wang Feng and Zhao Kuo were a perfect combination. One charged at the front, while the other was at the back, complementing each other. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Hua Tuobing's cavalry couldn't be compared to the Divine Martial Guard in terms of cavalry tactics. After all, Hua Tuobing's cavalry tactics were far from mature. Therefore, the Xiongnu cavalry felt restricted the moment they clashed with the Divine Martial Guard. The tactics that they were proud of were like child's play before the Divine Martial Guard. In terms of horsemanship, the Divine Martial Guard wasn't inferior. In terms of archery, although they weren't as good as the Xiongnu, the Divine Crossbow that the Divine Martial Guard was equipped with was a powerful weapon that was superior to the bows and arrows of the Xiongnu. In terms of equipment, they couldn't be compared. The radiant armor that the Divine Martial Guard was equipped with was designed by the Great Tang Empire to deal with the Turkic cavalry in the north. Even the valiant Turks were defeated by the radiant armor, not to mention the Xiongnu. Their bows and arrows were far inferior to the bows of the Turkic. Facing the radiant armor that was designed to defend against bows and arrows, the Xiongnu were so frustrated that they wanted to vomit blood. Even so, this battle was still very intense. The Xiongnu were still the Xiongnu. No matter what their opponents were, their savagery and bloodthirstiness would never fade. Furthermore, they had the advantage in numbers. The ferocious Xiongnu caused great damage to the Divine Martial Guard. Both sides fought to the death, and even the sky changed color. As time passed, the balance of the battle finally tilted towards the Divine Martial Guard. The arrogant Xiongnu cavalry tasted the bitter fruit of underestimating their enemy. If they knew that they were facing such an opponent, they wouldn't have attacked recklessly. The origin of this Xiongnu cavalry wasn't glorious at all. It wasn't a coincidence that they passed by this place. They were the remnants of the troops that had retreated from the battlefield. The one who defeated them was the genius general that streaked across the sky like a comet, Hua Tuobing. 4 days ago, Hua Tuobing led his troops and led the captured Xiongnu as the vanguard to open a path for the Han army. They crossed the vast desert, crossed the river, and captured Chanyu minister Zhang Chu alive. They killed King Beiche and attacked the left General Shuang, capturing the enemy's flag and war drum. This battle was earth-shattering and shocking. The Xiongnu people were beaten until they were dizzy and disoriented, and they were in a constant state of anxiety. Hua Tuobing's name spread throughout the plains. This young general was like a huge shadow that loomed over the Xiongnu. The ferocious Xiongnu felt suffocated. There were even rumors that Hua Tuobing was sent by the gods to punish the Xiongnu. A few days ago, Hua Tuobing led his troops on another journey. These Xiongnu cavalry were the subordinates of King Beiche, who was defeated by Hua Tuobing. They took the opportunity to escape from the battlefield. They didn't expect to encounter the Divine Martial Guards. The Xiongnu had suffered under Hua Tuobing's hands. How could they let the Han army go when they encountered them again? They thought that the demon Hua Tuobing had already left. The Han army following behind them must be the reserve troops. There was no need to worry about them. It was a good opportunity to get rid of them to vent their anger. How could they have known that Hua Jinyao would be a tough nut to crack compared to the psychiatry department? The commander of the Xiongnu cavalry was on the verge of tears. Since when did the Han army's cavalry become so powerful? First, there was the god of slaughter, Tsubing. Not to mention that, why were the rear troops so ferocious as well? The commander of the Xiongnu cavalry was a little depressed. He couldn't help but feel worried for the future of his tribe. The Han army, which was once at their mercy, had truly grown stronger. The days when the Xiongnu lived a free and unfettered life, wantonly plundering the Han people, were gone forever. Before sunset, the 4,000 Xiongnu cavalry were completely defeated. In this battle, they killed more than 3,000 people. The rest of the Xiongnu cavalry chose to surrender. The bravery of the divine martial guards made the commander of the Xiongnu cavalry lose the courage to resist. To him, this was fate. It wasn't something that could be changed. Of course, the Xiongnu also made the divine martial guards pay a heavy price. 800 divine martial guards were buried in the grassland. After 3 battles, more than half of the 3,000 divine martial guards were gone. War was so cruel. Fortunately, this was a battle map. After a soldier died in battle, the Lord could use the contribution points to revive the fallen soldier. Otherwise, Ouyang Shuo would have a hard time dealing with the heavy casualties of the divine martial guards. The problem was that he had to wait until the battle was over to revive the soldiers. Thus, Ouyang Shuo could only rely on less than 1,500 divine martial guards for the upcoming battle. He thought about the dangers along the way. For the first time, Ouyang Shuo felt a little lost. With such an intensive test, Gaia was trying to drive them, the overlords, to a dead end. Ouyang Shuo was sure that it wasn't a coincidence that they encountered the Xiongnu cavalry. He just didn't know how the other 2 troops of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas were doing. The situation was urgent when they broke out. Ouyang Shuo didn't have time to observe carefully to see if they had successfully broken out. Did they encounter similar Xiongnu cavalry after breaking out? Given the current situation, they could only fight for themselves. When night fell, Ouyang Shuo gave the order to set up camp. He could also use the night to interrogate the surrendered Xiongnu cavalry. Apart from worrying about the future, Ouyang Shuo was most concerned about where Hui Yuhao was. Chapter 588. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and all was silent. Military green tents abruptly appeared on the vast prairie, merging with the prairie. Seeing that the Han army had set up the tents in no time, the Xiongnu soldiers became even more respectful. They could not imagine how an object the size of a backpack could be assembled into a large tent that could accommodate several people. Because of the side effects of the bloodthirst talisman, Ouyang Shuo returned to his tent early to rest. Military advisor Zhao Kuo was in charge of setting up the camp, settling the wounded, and interrogating the prisoners of war. It was still early, so Ouyang Shuo naturally would not sleep. He held a jade pendant and a book in his hand. The jade pendant was the general soul that Zhou Yafu had dropped. This was the first time Ouyang Shuo had obtained the general soul of an emperor-level general. In a martial temple of Shanghai City, there was a general soul of a king-level general. Wei Zhang's resurrection had made Ouyang Shuo realize the importance of the general soul. The territorial wars in the future would only get crueler. Shanghai City was a big city with many generals. It could not be guaranteed that one day a general would fall. At this time, a general soul could save a life. Without this general soul, it would be impossible for Military Kill Ripper to resurrect Zhou Yafu. This was also the reason why Military Kill Ripper had chased after the Divine Martial Guards. Military Kill Ripper must have vomited 3 liters of blood by now. That's why I said that one should not be too arrogant. Ouyang Shuo muttered to himself. As the saying goes, personality determines fate. Military Kill Ripper was arrogant, and once he gained the upper hand, he became aggressive and did not know how to restrain himself. That was why he suffered such a crushing defeat today. On the other hand, Di Chun, after suffering a few losses in Ouyang Shuo's hands, became more and more serious. In this great encirclement, Di Chun hid behind Military Kill Ripper and became the fisherman. The Divine Martial Guards had suffered heavy casualties, but Di Chun's troops were probably intact. In this battle, Ouyang Shuo was no longer alone. If he hadn't acted decisively and decisively killed Zhou Yafu, his future situation would have been even worse. Speaking of which, the growth of the aristocratic families in the past 2 years was really shocking. They were no longer at a complete disadvantage in their confrontation with Ouyang Shua. Even Lord Chunxin had a big explosion at the end of the year. On the other hand, military kill Ripper might not be able to make a comeback after this defeat. This time, Ouyang Shua had indirectly helped Wandering Huan. It was reported that ever since the time limit for the exchange, military kill Ripper had been very aggressive in his competition with Wandering Huan in Guangxi province. It seemed that he wanted to establish himself as the leader of Guangxi province. As for the booklet, it was an unexpected gain. After obtaining it, Ouyang Shua had been constantly on the run and hadn't had the time to check it out. Mongolian Cavalier's Training Diary. This diary recorded famous General Zhou Yafu's epiphany when he read through the Mongolian Cavalier's training manual, along with his experience in daily training. Ouyang Shua couldn't help but burst into laughter after he finished reading it. Everything had its own destiny. The 2 items that Army Kill Ripper had won at the auction had ended up in Ouyang Shua's hands. Even though this diary could not allow Shanghai City to train elite Mongolian cavaliers, it could allow the generals in the territory to read it and use it as a reference to increase the standard of the cavaliers in the territory. Apart from that, Ouyang Shua also thought of Sun Wu. With the ability of the War Saint, with this diary as a foundation, he might be able to set up a Mongolian Cavalier training course in the military lecture hall. It was not impossible for Shanghai City to use the Mongolian Cavalier training method again. This time, military kill Ripper had done all he could for Shanghai City. After putting the 2 items into his storage pouch, Ouyang Shua began to focus and meditate. The side effect of the Bloodthirst Talisman lasted for 2 days, but it was not fixed. It varied from person to person. Ouyang Shua's body was strong, so the duration of the side effect was naturally shorter. Now, Ouyang Shua wanted to use the inner canon of the Yellow the Arch to speed up the healing process. The inner canon of the Yellow the Arch was born from the medical scripture. Therefore, the golden ethereal force had a miraculous effect on treating internal injuries. In the end, the Bloodthirst Talisman only stimulated the potential in Ouyang Shua's body. As long as he used the golden ethereal force to nourish his body and replenish the potential, the side effect would naturally disappear. In the current unpredictable situation, it would truly be troublesome if Ouyang Shua was unable to use force for 2 days. Therefore, the sooner he recovered, the better it would be. At around 8 o'clock at night, Zhao Kuo arrived outside Ouyang Shua's tent. Marquis. Zhao Kuo entered the tent, bowed, and began to report the results of the interrogation of the captives. At this time, Ouyang Shua had finished regulating his breathing. The inner canon of the Yellow the Arch didn't disappoint him. He would be fully recovered by noon tomorrow at the latest. With the help of the intelligence officers from the Bureau of Military Intelligence, the interrogation of the captives went very smoothly. Everyone, including the commander of the Xiongnu cavalry, told him everything they knew in detail. Ouyang Shua's interest was piqued when he learned that the Xiongnu cavalry had just retreated from the front lines. Unfortunately, the captives didn't know the next target of the infirmary department. Marquis, what should we do with these captives? Zhao Kuo asked. What do you think? I think we should keep some of them and remove some of them, Zhao Kuo replied. What do you mean? Ouyang Shua asked with a smile. After this battle, the Divine Martial Guards suffered heavy losses and are in urgent need of reinforcements. Therefore, I suggest that we learn from the Han army and expel the Xiongnu captives to fight against the Xiongnu, Zhao Kuo said. If that's the case, why should we remove some of them? Ouyang Shua asked again. Zhao Kuo's words implied that they should be killed and surrendered, which was not a good sign. There had always been a saying in the army, killing and surrendering is an inauspicious sign. Bai Qi was killed and surrendered, but he didn't have a good ending. Li Guang was killed and surrendered, but he died in humiliation. Therefore, the generals in the army were still very wary of killing and surrendering. First, the number of Divine Martial Guards is limited. If we send a large number of captives, there might be variables. Second, the quality of the captives is uneven, and some of the weaker ones should be eliminated, Zhao Kuo explained. Ouyang Shuo looked at the general in front of him and didn't say anything. Zhao Kuo was expressionless after giving his opinion. Ouyang Shuo could not figure out whether Zhao Kuo's words were sincere or if he was just trying to sound out his master. Logically speaking, Zhao Kuo was killed by Bai Qi in the past. Although Zhao Kuo didn't personally experience killing and surrendering, he should be very resistant to it. The military advisor in front of him was much more scheming than the other generals in the territory. Sometimes even Ouyang Shuo, the Lord, could not figure it out. Of course, there was no doubt about Zhao Kuo's loyalty. It wasn't because Ouyang Shuo had sharp eyes, but because Zhao Kuo's loyalty was as high as 90 points. After a long while, Ouyang Shuo gave his final suggestion. If that's the case, confiscate the weapons, equipment, and horses of the unqualified captives and abandon them in the camp. Let them fend for themselves. Understood. Zhao Kuo nodded. The moment he lowered his head, a hint of relief flashed in his eyes. After Zhao Kuo left, Ouyang Shuo didn't feel sleepy at all. The Battle of Mabe was the one where Ouyang Shuo didn't have a plan. Up until now, he had been on the defensive all the time and was running into walls everywhere. If it wasn't for the strength of the divine martial guards, he would have been out of the battle long ago. Subduing Huitzubing was just a delusion. Zhao Kuo's suggestion made Ouyang Shuo feel enlightened. Fighting alone in the Battle of Mabe was the worst plan. The key to victory was to make use of the native forces on the battle map. The 3,000 soldiers he had brought with him wouldn't be able to withstand such a consumption. The best plan was to use the battle to sustain the battle. Thinking of this, Ouyang Shuo walked out of the tent. A curfew had been imposed outside the tent. Without the general's order, all the soldiers had to stay in their own tents and were not allowed to move around. The entire camp was quiet. Even the camp where the prisoners of war were held was filled with snoring sounds. Ouyang Shuo looked up at the sky. The moon hung high in the sky. Tomorrow was going to be another fine day. What are you looking at, Marquis? Suddenly, a greeting came from behind Ouyang Shuo. Who's there? Ouyang Shuo immediately put his sword in his hand. Then, he felt a little nervous. This was the camp of the divine martial guards. How can an outsider enter? Turning around, Ouyang Shuo's jaw dropped to the ground when he saw the newcomer. Marquis, you don't recognize me? The other party's smile was full of flattery and greed. The person who suddenly appeared behind Ouyang Shuo was the commissary of the camp. His huge belly dazzled Ouyang Shuo's eyes. Why are you here? Ouyang Shuo didn't hide his surprise. I'm a commissary. I'm here to deliver supplies to you. Supplies? Ouyang Shuo frowned. Then, his eyes lit up and he asked uncertainly, You mean to exchange for battle resource points? Marquis is wise. The commissary's flattery was smooth. But I only have a pitiful 50 battle resource points left. How can I trouble you with that? Ouyang Shuo didn't dare to underestimate the commissary anymore. It was obvious that this commissary was like the mysterious merchant, a special NPC arranged by Gaia. Marquis, you have treasures in your hands. How can you be pitiful? The commissary was as flattering as usual. Treasures? Ouyang Shuo was confused. Battle token. The commissary solved the mystery. Ouyang Shuo understood. So that's how it is. He took out the token that dropped from the bandit leader and asked, How many battle resource points is this token worth? The commissary shook his head. Marquis, you can use this token to make a request. Any request. Ouyang Shuo's interest was piqued. Marquis, you can make a request first. I'll judge whether it's okay or not. The commissary replied. Ouyang Shuo frowned. The other party was playing too deep. How would he know how much this token was worth? If he made a request that was too light, wouldn't he be making a huge loss? Ouyang Shuo couldn't help but think of the Silver Wish Tower in his territory. The two were similar. The commissary's nature was hard to change. He was very cunning. Ouyang Shuo couldn't let the other party take advantage of him. Chapter 589. I'd like to teleport my troops directly to the tent of the cavalry general. Is that okay? Ouyang Shua used the military token to make his first request to the provision officer. The provisions officer was slightly speechless towards Ouyang Shua's exorbitant demands. He didn't expect that the marquis opposite him, who had a high status, was even more shameless than him. Those who achieve great things don't care about trifles. The officer cursed in his heart and replied stiffly, "You must be joking, Marquis. Can't I?" Ouyang Shua was a little disappointed and said, "All right, I'll take a step back. Can you revive all the divine martial guards that died in battle?" For Ouyang Shua, the 3,000 divine martial guards were the biggest trump card of this battle. If the divine martial guards could be restored to full strength, it would be of great help to him to implement the strategy of using war to nurture war. The first request was just Ouyang Shua's joke. The second request was his real goal. After asking the question, Ouyang Shua looked nervously at the grain officer opposite him. The officer hesitated, as if he was weighing the pros and cons. After keeping Ouyang Shua in suspense, he said unhurriedly, "Sure." Phew. Ouyang Shua let out a long sigh of relief and cursed in his heart, "Damn you." He even suspected that the officer was purposely making fun of him. Ouyang Shua's heart moved when he saw the provision officer looking at the token in his hand fervently. He gripped the token tightly and said, "Can I make a small request?" "You can only make one request with one token," the grain officer answered without hesitation. "Then forget it. The previous request is invalid." Ouyang Shua said, and was about to put the token into his interspatial pouch. He was certain that the other party was determined to obtain the token and wouldn't give up so easily since they had rushed over in the middle of the night. As expected, a bitter smile flashed across the grain officer's face. He said in a hoarse voice, "Marquis, please do not make things difficult for me. How about this? Marquis, please tell me what your request is. I will see if I can help." "Straightforward," Ouyang Shua said with a smile. "I want anything from the white cavalry general." Ouyang Shua's request was rather strange, and it caught the grain officer somewhat unprepared. To him, it wasn't a difficult task. As a special NPC, the scope of his abilities was not something players could fathom. However, he could not break the rules set by Gaia, nor did he dare to break them. "How about this? Lord Marquis, please hand over the remaining 50 battle resource points. This lowly one will comply with your request. How about it?" The ration officer said politely. "Deal." Ouyang Shua naturally knew when to stop. The Marquis is wise. The transaction went smoothly, and the grain officer was extremely excited. His fat belly bounced up and down. The two old foxes chuckled, feeling that they had gained a great advantage. The rations officer bade farewell and left. Ouyang Shua held a pair of socks in his hand. It was what the white cavalry general, Hua Tsiubing, had used to replace it. Even though Hua Tsiubing was a general of light cavalry and was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, the smell of his socks was unspeakable. Ouyang Shua even suspected that the goddamn grain officer didn't forget to play a trick on him in the end. Who would have thought that it would be a lucky hit? With a smile on his face, Ouyang Shua yelled at the tent, "Little White, come out." "Howl." Little White walked out reluctantly. Its injuries had already healed. Ouyang Shua handed Hua Tsiubing's smelly socks to Little White. "Smell it. Can you track it?" "Howl." Little White sniffed and rolled its eyes in a very human-like manner. A wolf's nose was much more sensitive than a human's. An ordinary wolf or dog's sense of smell was more than 40 times that of a human's. A spirit beast like Little White's sense of smell was 1,000,000 times stronger than that of humans. That's right, it was 1,000,000 times stronger than a human's. Therefore, the socks were only smelly to Ouyang Shua's nose, but to Little White, it was unbearably smelly. It almost fainted from the smell. Even the genius general of his generation, Hua Tsiubing, had a time when he was despised. "Can you track it?" Ouyang Shua asked again. "Ow!" Little White raised its head proudly. "I'll leave it to you tomorrow, buddy." Ouyang Shua seemed to understand Little White's meaning. He smiled and patted its head. "Howl, howl." Little White nodded and rubbed against Ouyang Shuo before returning to the tent proudly. What's Yubing, you can't run away this time. Ouyang Shuo raised his head and looked at the horizon in the distance. He smiled. The next morning, the army set off again. The divine martial guards who had died in battle had all been resurrected. Both the divine martial guards and the surrendered Xiong new soldiers turned a blind eye to this strange phenomenon. Ordinary people could not fathom the greatness of God Gaia. After a round of selection, only 500 surrendered Xiong new soldiers were able to travel with the army. The rest were naturally left in the camp. Fortunately, this was the territory of the Xiong Nu, so their lives were not in danger. As for the contribution points, it was not enough for Ouyang Shuo to go back on his promise. After they set off, Little White walked at the front of the army. With Little White's sense of smell, even if Hua Tsubing was 1,000 miles away, he would not be able to escape from Little White's tracking. This time, the army was not walking blindly. They were moving forward with a destination in mind. Even without the exquisite military map, the divine martial guards could accurately locate the Han army. Along the way, from time to time, they would encounter defeated Xiong new cavalry from the front line. Hua Tsubing's fame often rang in Ouyang Shuo's ears through the cavalry songs. It made him yearn for the divine general that he had never met before. It made him even more determined to recruit Hua Tsubing. The 3,000 divine martial guards were fully restored. Ouyang Shuo himself had completely eliminated the side effects of the bloodthirst talisman. There was no reason to be polite to these Xiong new cavalry. There was only one word: kill. As long as the enemy was less than 10,000, they would not be a match for the divine martial guards. As they swept through the army, Ouyang Shuo's contribution points kept increasing. 2 days after they set off, his contribution points had already exceeded the 100,000 mark. Moreover, it was still increasing rapidly. The Xiong new soldiers in the army were also changed batch after batch. With the strength of the divine martial guards, it was not difficult for them to control 3,000 Xiong new soldiers. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo had to choose a group of elites from the surrendered soldiers to join the camp of the surrendered soldiers. And in every battle, it was these surrendered soldiers who charged at the front. Once the surrendered soldiers were injured, they would immediately be replenished. Zhao Kuo's suggestion of using war to nurture war was carried out very well. The effect was also very obvious. Towards the end, the divine martial guards did not even need to personally go into battle. Ordinary battles could be settled by the surrendered soldiers. As a result, the divine martial guards gradually became a strategic deterrent force. Ouyang Shuo was using the Xiong new soldiers to kill the Xiong new cavalry to earn contribution points. This method was indeed very satisfying. As a result, the losses of the divine martial guards were greatly reduced. After more than 10 battles, the total losses of the divine martial guards were less than 500 people. If Hua Tsubing's troops were the nightmare of the Xiong new tribes, then the army of Shanghai City that followed closely behind them was the lingering nightmare of the defeated soldiers. The army of Shanghai City was like a bulldozer that wreaked havoc on the Great Plains. In an instant, the valiant Xiong new tribes were like sick cats. Towards the end, it seemed to have become a habit. Under the command of the divine martial guards, the surrendered Xiong new soldiers killed their own kind in exchange for a chance to survive. Ouyang Shuo even made an empty promise that he would record the surrendered Xiong new soldiers who fought well and performed meritorious deeds. He would then report it to the cavalry general and request for them to be rewarded. As a result, the surrendered Xiong new soldiers became even more motivated. Ouyang Shuo successfully replicated Hua Tsubing's tactics on the Great Plains. Of course, Ouyang Shuo did not get carried away even though the battle was going smoothly. He did not forget that the main purpose of this trip was to catch up to Hua Tsubing's troops. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo avoided unnecessary battles in the later stages of the war. The cavalry advanced like a hurricane and chased after the main force of the Han army led by Hua Tsubing. According to Little White, the distance between the two sides was gradually shortening. If everything went smoothly, they would catch up to Hua Tsubing's troops in 4 days. Ouyang Shuo was invigorated when he heard that. Am I finally going to meet that legendary general? Among the good news, there was also something that worried Ouyang Shaw. The day before yesterday, Ouyang Shaw led his troops to the previously agreed rendezvous point. When he arrived there, he did not see the figures of Lingxi City and Longshuan City. Because of this, Ouyang Shaw rested here for a whole day. He even sent out scouts to investigate in all directions, but they did not see any signs of them. Helpless, Ouyang Shaw could only arrange for 10 divine martial guards to wait here. The main force set off again. The two sides communicated with each other through hummingbirds. This battle was a race. Ouyang Shaw could not delay for too long just to wait for his allies. He did not know what difficulties Zhang Liao and Qin Xiong had encountered. The next day, another interesting thing happened. The scouts that were sent out did not find the allies, but they unexpectedly found traces of Di Chen's troops. When Ouyang Shaw received the news, he made a prompt decision to give Di Chen a big gift. As the saying goes, it is impolite not to reciprocate. Since the Yin-Huang alliance was able to ambush him, then Ouyang Shaw would naturally be able to do the exact opposite. Right now, the army of Shanghai City was at its peak. With the help of the Xiong new soldiers, even if Di Chen's troops were unharmed, they would still be defeated. Needless to say, Ouyang Shaw brought Huyin Xiu with him. This guide was not overshadowed by Little White's existence. Without Huyin Xiu's translation, Shanghai City would not be able to obtain any information from the Xiong new soldiers. As for recruiting the soldiers, it was even more impossible. Chapter 590. Huyin Xiu's existence was the key to Ouyang Shao's strategy of using war to nurture war. The current Great Plains was like the back garden of Shanghai City. Once Di Chen's troops leaked their whereabouts, they wouldn't be able to escape Ouyang Shao's pursuit. With the Xiong new soldiers as the front lines, Di Chen's troops' every move couldn't be hidden. Soon, an ambush plan for Di Chen's troops was drawn up. On the morning of the 10th day of the battle, Di Chen was leading his troops on the Great Plains. After the ambush, Di Chen, Battle Wolf, and Military Kill Ripper went their separate ways. The other lords were either defeated and left the battle, gave up and focused on the side missions, or continued to lead their troops forward. There were no other lords that traveled together on the prairie. Everyone knew that the battle had reached a critical moment. The so-called allies could become enemies at any time. If that was the case, it was better to go alone. The problem was, not every army was as strong as the divine martial guards. Not every army had an experienced guide like Huyin Xiu. Not every army could copy Hua Zhubing's genius tactics. The ferocious Xiong new cavalry caused the mutant armies to taste the bitter fruits of their labor. Along the way, at least 6 lords were defeated by the Xiong new cavalry and completely left the battle. Even the most dazzling army killer was eliminated because of Zhou Yafu's death, and the 3,000 Mongolian elite cavaliers suffered heavy losses when they fought against the divine martial guards. In a fight against the Xiongnu cavaliers, they were unfortunately wiped out. Similarly, after breaking out of the encirclement with great difficulty, Seeking Dragon Point encountered another group of Xiongnu cavalry like Ouyang Shaw. After a fierce battle, they were defeated and helplessly eliminated. Even Zhang Liao's troops were struggling at death's door. Because of this, they didn't rush to the designated location to meet up with Ouyang Shaw. On the other hand, Di Chen was lucky. Under the command of the old general, Lin Pe, his troops had overcome many obstacles and still had around 2,000 men left. Di Chen's cunning was part of this. In the previous battle, Di Chen's troops didn't have the heart to stop them. The truly tough ones were eaten by the alliance army that was bribed with money. Di Chen just sat back and enjoyed the fruits of others' labor. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so free. Now, Di Chen's luck had finally come to an end. A scene similar to the encirclement and suppression was reenacted on the prairie. 3,000 Xiong new soldiers, along with the almost full divine martial guards, suddenly attacked Di Chen's troops. How can you say that you have no clothes? Di Chen recognized the golden dragon flag of Shanghai City at once, and couldn't help but feel shocked. His first thought was the same as Ouyang Shua's, and that was to lead his troops to break out of the encirclement. Unfortunately, Ouyang Shua didn't give him the chance. The ambush location that Huyan Xiu had chosen was extremely ingenious. There were small hills on both sides, and not far ahead was a lake. As for the rear, that was where the Xiong new cavalry was fiercely attacking. Immediately, the Emperor Dust tribe fell into a tight encirclement, unable to escape. Lien Po was indeed an experienced general. He immediately sensed the unfavorable situation on the battlefield and reported to Di Chun, "My lord, the terrain is extremely unfavorable for our army. I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to break through." Hearing this, Di Chen's face turned pale. His first reaction was to think of Zhou Yafu, who had been forcefully killed by He Yu Wui not long ago. Could it be that who says who has no clothes is going to be ruthless again this time? Thinking of this, Di Chen frowned. If Lien Po was killed, Di Chun couldn't imagine what kind of impact it would have on Handan City. Although Handan City had recruited a few more king-level generals during this period of time, the old General Lien Po was still the pillar and backbone of Handan City's army. Once Lien Po fell, the Handan City army would have to retreat for at least half a year. This heavy price was something that Di Chun couldn't bear. The problem was 6,000 against 2,000. No matter how brave Lien Po was, Di Chen's troops were still being beaten back. "No, I won't allow it." Seeing that the situation was not right, Di Chen's eyes flashed with determination. He gripped the sword at his waist tightly in his hand. "General, do you have the confidence to break out of the encirclement?" Di Chun asked Lien Po, as if making a final confirmation. Lien Po wasn't a reckless person. He knew that there must be a deeper meaning behind his lord's question. He didn't dare to lie and said bitterly, "My lord, the probability of breaking out of the encirclement is less than 30%. Is that so?" Di Chen muttered to himself. 30%. If it was 2 years ago, when Di Chen was still in high spirits, it might be possible. But now, with Di Chen's cautious character, he didn't dare to take the risk. If that's the case, then retreat. After Di Chen finished speaking, he flipped the sword in his hand and committed suicide. His decisiveness was so decisive that Lien Po couldn't stop him. With Di Chen's death, the rest of Handan City's troops were automatically sent out of the battle map. Di Chen used such an extreme method to save Lien Po's life. In comparison, Military Kill Ripper was ferocious, but he lacked Di Chen's decisiveness. When Military Kill Ripper was still hesitating, when he was still hoping that he could lead his troops to save Zhou Yafu, when he was still holding out hope for Hua Xiubing, Zhou Yafu had already been killed by Ouyang Shua. This was the difference between them. It was a taboo for a lord to hold on a hope and not give up hope. Seeing Di Chen's troops suddenly disappear, Ouyang Shua naturally knew what had happened. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart at Di Chen's decisiveness. An opponent who knew how to give and take, who could pick up and let go, was very terrifying. The battle against Di Chun had ended, but it wasn't the end of Ouyang Shua's plan. Because of this, Ouyang Shua had other ideas. At this point in the battle, he wasn't in a hurry to chase after Hua Xiubing's troops. Ouyang Shua's plan was to carry out a large-scale encirclement at the rear of Hua Xiubing's troops. If they could surround and kill all the lords, the final victor would naturally be Shanghai City. This logic wasn't too simple. Ouyang Shua was relying on the Xiong new soldiers. Other than Huyan Xiu, Ouyang Shua had discovered many talents from these lords. Some are good at tracking, some are good at concealment. Moreover, these Xiong new soldiers were the local tyrants of the grasslands. With Little White's cooperation, Ouyang Shua was confident that they could surround Hua Xiubing's troops and find the other lords. After listening to Ouyang Shua's plan, Zhao Kuo was speechless. Zhao Kuo had to admit that there was still a huge gap between his vision and that of a marquis. This kind of strategy had already surpassed the scope of nurturing war through war. Next, Ouyang Shua's plan was officially carried out. Up until this point in the battle, there were no more than 4 mutant armies on Hua Xiubing's route that had survived, excluding Shanghai City. That was why Ouyang Shua could afford to waste time. On the first day of the plan, an entire mutant army was destroyed. On the second day, there was no news. Ouyang Shua wasn't in a hurry. While looking for traces of the enemy, he approached Hua Tsubing's troops. There was no contradiction between the two. This was because the ultimate target of all the mutant armies was Hua Tsubing's troops. Without the commander of Hua Tsubing's troops, no one was confident that they could pass through the vast grasslands and reach Wolf Story Mountain. Hua Tsubing had become Ouyang Shua's bait. If this divine general knew about Ouyang Shua's actions, what would he think? On the third day, Battle Wolf's troops were found. Unlike Di Chun, Battle Wolf was a hot-blooded man. In the encirclement battle, Battle Wolf gave his all and displayed the demeanor of a soldier. Along the way, he had fought many battles of various sizes and never retreated. Therefore, Ouyang Shua was only facing the remnants of his troops. Seeing the golden flag of Shanghai City, a hint of bitterness flashed across Battle Wolf's mouth. When He Wui broke out of the encirclement, Battle Wolf had a premonition that they would meet again. What he didn't expect was that when they met again, the situation had already been reversed. In terms of decisiveness, Battle Wolf wasn't inferior to Di Chun. It was just that the way they chose was slightly different. Di Chun committed suicide, while Battle Wolf chose to die in battle. A soldier's home was always the battlefield. Battle Wolf led his troops and personally killed his way into the divine martial guards. For a moment, he was unrivaled. Facing such an opponent, Ouyang Shua gave him the greatest respect. The two lords started a general versus general duel on the prairie. Ouyang Shua fought to his heart's content in this battle. Battle Wolf was worthy of being an opponent worthy of respect. Although he couldn't cultivate multiple emperor-level martial arts like Ouyang Shua, his combat strength was also extraordinary. The two of them fought for more than 300 rounds. Even the soldiers on both sides unconsciously stopped and watched this battle. In the end, Ouyang Shua relied on the endless true chi of the Yellow Emperor's internal cannon and the sharpness of the Red Knight's sword to finally kill Battle Wolf with half a move. Awesome! Battle Wolf looked at the Red Knight's sword that had pierced into his abdomen and grinned. It was pure and hardy. You Wui, if it wasn't for the fact that we're from different camps, maybe we could be friends. Ouyang Shua smiled slightly and said with a slight meaning, that day will come. Ha! Battle Wolf laughed 3 times and died of exhaustion. The death of Battle Wolf made Ouyang Shua emotional. He said before that one day they might become friends, and it wasn't a joke. Compared to Battle Wolf, Ouyang Shua naturally knew the future of the game better. Gaia's 3 years were coming soon. The most exciting thing in the game, the National War System, was about to be activated. Although the Mountain and Sea Alliance and the Yanhuang Alliance were fighting to the death. When a national war came, the two alliances might have to join forces to fight against the enemy. What they were fighting for now was the future national war and the leadership of the China region. For Ouyang Shua, who was familiar with the direction of the game, he naturally couldn't tolerate the leadership falling into the hands of Di Chun and the others. He wanted to personally lead the lords of the China region to show their power to the 4 countries. And for Di Chun and the others, who were born arrogant, how could they easily hand over the leadership? Therefore, Ouyang Shua could only use force to convince them. If they were not convinced, he would beat them until they were convinced. And this was the root of all the conflict between the two alliances. Chapter 591. With the elimination of the Wolf Warriors, Ouyang Shua was almost invincible on Hua Tsubing's route. Over the next 2 days, the remaining lords were also wiped out by Ouyang Shua's troops. Even the lost Zhang Liao's troops successfully met up with the main army. After that, Ouyang Shua did not delay and led his troops to chase after Hua Tsubing. Because there was no enemy, their journey was naturally smooth. On the 15th day of the battle, under Little White's guidance, the main army finally met up with Hua Tsubing's troops. His face was dark, his brows were sharp, and his eyes were bright. Hua Tsubing's first impression on Ouyang Shua was very clear. like adding oil to a raging fire. During the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, Lord Yin had once commented on Hua Xiubing in front of Emperor Wu of Han, a knife that is sharpened too quickly and too easily breaks. Lord Yan's comment turned out to be a prophecy. The genius General Hua Xiubing rose like a comet, streaked across the sky of the Western Han dynasty, and died young. How can a mutant be without clothes? Greetings, General. Ouyang Shua bowed. You came at the right time. Tomorrow, the main army will attack the left virtuous prince's troops. Lead your troops and join the battle. Hua Xiubing was decisive and gave a military order. Yes, General. Ouyang Shua nodded and continued. Reporting to General, there are some Xiongnu soldiers in our army who have made contributions to the Han dynasty. Please reward them. As Ouyang Shua spoke, he handed over the booklet that recorded his military achievements. Hua Xiubing was a little interested when he heard this. He took the booklet and smiled. Not bad. I'm clear about rewards and punishments. Those who make contributions will be rewarded. After the battle, I will report their military achievements to the imperial court. Ouyang Shua's method was very in line with Hua Xiubing's personality, so he was naturally happy. This was the so-called convergence, and it was the best way to get close to one's superior. Thank you, General. Ouyang Shua smiled. With Hua Xiubing's guarantee, the handsome reward he had promised earlier was not an empty promise. Presumably, the Xiongnu soldiers would receive the news and put in more effort in the battle tomorrow. And this was Ouyang Shua's goal. As the only mutant lord who arrived at the front line and was also a marquis of the first rank, even Hua Xiubing would not truly neglect Ouyang Shua. For tomorrow's battle, Ouyang Shua was appointed as Hua Xiubing's assistant general to lead the army on the left. Unlike Wei Qing, Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty did not arrange for Hua Xiubing to have an assistant so that he would not restrict his abilities and become a hindrance to him. The 50,000 cavalrymen assigned to Hua Xiubing were also the most elite soldiers in the Han army. Emperor Wu of Han had once said that Hua Xiubing could pick the soldiers he liked from the entire army. Even great General Wei Qing had never received such treatment before. If not for Hua Xiubing's claim that he only needed 50,000 elite cavalrymen, Emperor Wu of Han would have been willing to hand over half of the imperial guards to Hua Xiubing. From this, it could be seen that Emperor Wu of Han favored Hua Xiubing. It could even be said that he doted on him. Someone once said that Hua Xiubing was a famous general trained by Emperor Wu of Han. When Emperor Wu saw Hua Xiubing, he felt like he was looking at his younger self. As the emperor, Emperor Wu of Han could not personally lead his troops in a battle. In a sense, Hua Xiubing's achievements on the battlefield were entrusted to Emperor Wu of Han's feelings for war. From this, it was not difficult to understand Emperor Wu of Han's grief at Hua Xiubing's sudden death. He even built Hua Xiubing's mausoleum on the side of his imperial mausoleum, Maoling. Hua Xiubing's camp was filled with his personal army. Among them, the famous generals were almost all surrendered generals of the Xiongnu. For example, the most famous general under Hua Xiubing, Zhao Bonu, was in charge of the Right Army. Zhao Bonu had wandered the Xiongnu territory when he was young. He later returned to the Han army and became Hua Xiubing's military officer. After several expeditions, he was promoted to General Junji. Later on, he was implicated by the witchcraft curse and was exterminated. Ouyang Shua's current position was partly due to his battle tactics and Hua Xiubing's kindred spirits. Otherwise, with the general's personality, it was possible that he would not have paid any attention to Hua Xiubing. In tomorrow's battle, excluding Shanghai City's army, there were 50,000 Han cavalrymen and 30,000 surrendered Xiongnu soldiers. Hua Xiubing personally led the middle army, which included 30,000 Han cavalrymen and 20,000 surrendered Xiongnu soldiers. Zhao Bonu's right army consisted of 10,000 Han cavalrymen and 10,000 surrendered Xiongnu soldiers. Ouyang Shua was left with only 10,000 Han cavalrymen. Hua Xiubing's arrangement was probably done on the spur of the moment. He had Shanghai City's 6,000 soldiers in mind. Although Hua Xiubing had yet to witness the might of the divine martial guards on the battlefield, he could still tell that this troop was a true trump card. Putting everything else aside, just the murderous aura emanating from the divine martial guards was enough to make Hua Tsubing a little excited. In comparison, even Hua Tsubing's personal army could not compare. How could Hua Tsubing not be in awe of such a strong army? Because of this, Ouyang Shuo was able to gain Hua Tsubing's respect and trust. As for the rest, it was all fabricated. After understanding the military order, Ouyang Shuo did not stay any longer and immediately left the tent. As the saying went, it was better to come at the right time than to come early. According to history, after defeating the left virtuous prince's troops, Hua Tsubing was still focused on killing the Xiongnu Chanyu and leading his troops north to Wolf Story Mountain to pray to the heavens. If nothing unexpected happened, the battle the next day would be a battle where Ouyang Shuo frantically harvested contribution points. There wouldn't be much of a commotion. However, there was one thing that caught Ouyang Shuo's attention. In history, the left virtuous prince had led his trusted aides to abandon the army and escape. If possible, Ouyang Shuo wanted to make a great contribution to Hua Tsubing as a greeting gift. In the Han army's tents, Xiongnu soldiers in Han military uniforms could be seen everywhere. Therefore, the 3,000 surrendered Xiongnu soldiers that Ouyang Shuo brought did not stand out in the camp. After setting up camp, Ouyang Shuo summoned his military advisor, Zhao Kuo, to discuss the battle the next day. According to Cavalry General Hua Tsubing's arrangement, the Shanghai city troops were placed on the left flank of the army. They had to obey the cavalry general's orders. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely difficult to successfully kill the left virtuous prince. After all, military orders had to be obeyed. Without Hua Tsubing's orders, Ouyang Shuo would not dare to act rashly. His only hope was that the performance of the divine martial guards would attract Hua Tsubing's attention. The next morning, the army immediately broke camp. At this time, the left virtuous prince's troops were still unaware that Hua Tsubing had his eyes on them. In his opinion, Hua Tsubing should be 1,000 miles away, so he could rest easy. He did not expect Hua Tsubing to appear and disappear so mysteriously. Before noon, 80,000 Han soldiers charged into the left virtuous prince's troops and caught them off guard. The two armies started a monstrous massacre on the prairie. The Han army was strong, and the Xiongnu panicked. Hua Tsubing was indeed a genius general. He was able to win so many battles not only because of luck, but also because of his skill in commanding battles. Ouyang Shuo was deeply impressed. In Shanghai City, it was likely that only Bai Qi and Han Xin would be able to defeat him. Even Sun Bin, who was also a divine general, was inferior in terms of spirit. Under Hua Tsubing's command, the Han army's attacks came wave after wave. The elite left virtuous prince's troops were beaten to the point that they could not fight back. The cavalry that the Xiongnu were best at seemed weak in front of the Han cavalry. At around 3 p.m., the left virtuous prince's troops were in a disadvantageous position and were about to collapse. Cavalry General's orders. Ouyang Shuo was currently commanding the left wing and did not personally go into battle. The divine martial guards were led by Wang Feng, and they fought back and forth on the battlefield, earning Ouyang Shuo a steady stream of contribution points. They were about to break the 200,000 mark. Even the 3,000 surrendered Xiongnu soldiers were counted under Ouyang Shuo's name. Apart from that, 20% of the Han army's gain from the left-wing army were also counted under Ouyang Shuo's left general's name. Ouyang Shuo did not expect that the position of left general would have such additional rewards. From the looks of it, he could make use of it in future battles. Just as the battle was getting intense, a messenger suddenly ran over. Cavalry general's orders. The left wing is to circle around the enemy's rear and cut off their retreat. Yes, General. Ouyang Shuo was overjoyed. What he wanted really came true. Ouyang Shuo was worried that the left virtuous prince would escape. He did not expect Hua Tsubing's military orders to arrive. Generally speaking, those who were in charge of cutting off the enemy's retreat were elites recognized by the commander-in-chief. This time, Hua Tsubing did not mobilize the right wing led by Zhao Bonu, but the left wing. From the looks of it, The performance of the divine martial guards on the battlefield had completely convinced Hua Xiubing. At least, Ouyang Shua's efforts were not in vain. When they were discussing the battle tactics yesterday, Zhao Kuo had suggested that the divine martial guards should disregard sacrifices and losses and fight in their strongest state on the battlefield. This was the only way to gain Hua Xiubing's approval. In the end, it was just as Zhao Kuo had said. In this battle, Zhao Kuo had contributed twice and made contributions twice. This military advisor was worth it. In Shanghai City, this general who was known to be an armchair strategist finally showed his brilliance. With a swoosh, the Scarlet Knight's sword was unsheathed once again. Personal guards, follow me. Ouyang Shua patted his warhorse and galloped out. This time, he wanted to personally kill the left virtuous prince. Kill! 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 Seeing the Marquis personally take action, the divine martial guards were all fired up. Everyone knew that when a Marquis took action, it was the most intense moment of the war. Ouyang Shua led 3,000 divine martial guards, 3,000 Xiongnu soldiers, and 10,000 Han soldiers on the left wing. They boldly left the battlefield and charged at the enemy's rear. The vast prairie became the world of cavalry. With Hu Yinxiu leading the way, Ouyang Shua did not have to worry about getting lost. Left virtuous prince, your head is mine, Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. Chapter 592. P.S. The structure of the territory has been updated to 20. Those who are interested can go take a look. Ouyang Shua led his army around the flank of the battlefield and went straight to the rear of the left virtuous prince. The left virtuous prince already had the intention to retreat. He was gathering his trusted troops and preparing to retreat quietly. He did not expect that Ouyang Shua would arrive with his troops less than 100 meters away. Left virtuous prince, where do you think you're going? Ouyang Shua circulated his ethereal force and shouted. His voice shook the surroundings. On the battlefield, the soldiers of both sides who were fighting heard this loud shout. Hua Xiubing's eyes narrowed. He was secretly shocked. He had never imagined that the Lord of the Mutant Realm, who had kept a low profile in front of him, would have such a profound cultivation base. He is indeed extraordinary, Hua Xiubing muttered to himself. The ferocity of the divine martial guards on the battlefield had shocked Hua Xiubing. Just now, he was still curious about how majestic the commander of this iron-blooded army was. From this shout, Hua Xiubing had a hint of enlightenment. Subconsciously, Hua Xiubing thought of the emperor. Both of them hid their strength. Once they exploded, it would be monstrous. For the first time, Hua Xiubing was interested in Ouyang Shua. When the Xiongnu cavalry heard this shout, they turned their heads and looked back suspiciously. They could not believe what they saw. They were still fighting on the front lines, but their king was abandoning them. The Xiongnu cavalry was in an uproar. The blow to their morale was fatal. Hua Xiubing was sharp. He immediately seized the opportunity and launched a series of attacks. At the same time, Hua Xiubing ordered his men to announce surrender on the battlefield to further shake the morale of the Xiongnu cavalry. When Prince Wuxian heard that, his expression turned exceptionally ugly. Without even turning his head back, he simply walked away. A sense of humiliation lingered in his heart. The mighty lord of the desert would not be able to raise his head in front of his people anymore. Ouyang Shua saw this and left the Han army and the Xiongnu soldiers to cooperate with Hua Xiubing's central army to force the Xiongnu army to surrender. He personally led the divine martial guards to chase after the left virtuous prince. The tall little white ran at the front of the group. It was unusually mighty. What Ouyang Shua didn't expect was that this chase would take him over 5 kilometers. The Xiongnu warhorses were definitely not ordinary. The steeds of the left virtuous prince's trusted aides were the elites of the Xiongnu warhorses, comparable to the green beetle horses. It would not be easy to catch up to them. Moreover, this area was within Prince Wuxian's sphere of influence. No matter how familiar Hu Yinxiu was, there was still a gap between him and Prince Wuxian, the local tyrant. Prince Wuxian was also cunning. He used his geographical advantage to trick the divine martial guard a few times. As they chased, the distance between them grew wider and wider. It was no wonder that in history, Huitubing had led his troops to pursue Prince Zhuxian all the way to Wolf Story Mountain, but still failed to capture him. The king of the Xiongnu kingdom was extremely cunning. After another half an hour, Prince Zhuxian completely disappeared from sight. Fortunately, he still had Whitey. Prince Zhuxian's trail was still within Whitey's sniffing range. Seeing that he was unable to catch up, Ouyang Shua gritted his teeth, endured the pain in his heart, took out a talisman, and tore it apart. A white light flashed and soared into the sky, enveloping the 3,000 divine martial guards. With a flash of white light, they disappeared into the green beetle horses. Immediately, the green beetle horses that the cavalrymen sat on went berserk and galloped away. This talisman was the rapid marching scroll that Ouyang Shua had spent 200 battle resource points to purchase. This scroll was originally reserved by Ouyang Shua for the final sprint. Now that Ouyang Shua had no opponents on Huitubing's route, he naturally had no use for it. Even Zhang Liao's troops that were lucky enough to survive numbered less than 1,000. Zhang Liao had already made it clear that he was giving up on this fight. Zhang Liao knew that the relationship between Lingxi City and Shanghai City was in a rather sensitive period, so he naturally acted more cautiously. In order to chase after Prince Zhuxian, Ouyang Shua had also paid a huge price. After all, even if the rapid marching scroll was not used during a sprint, it had miraculous effects in other areas. Rapid marching scroll increases marching speed by 50 for 4 hours after use. With the powerful enhancement of this scroll, the divine martial guards were like heavenly soldiers as they galloped across the plains. In less than an hour, Prince Zhuxian's troops appeared in Ouyang Shua's vision again. The rumbling of horse hooves made Prince Zhuxian's heart tremble. Just now, he was still feeling smug that he had finally gotten rid of that annoying fly. Who would have thought that the enemy troops would arrive again? Prince Zhuxian's face turned paler as he looked at the approaching enemy troops. He could not imagine what kind of warhorse it was to be able to move so quickly. No one would be able to answer this question for him. In the blink of an eye, the divine martial guards had already arrived. At this moment, any words would be useless. In this battle, either you die or I live. Ouyang Shua personally led the army and directly charged into the enemy's formation. His target was the heavily guarded Prince Zhuxian. At this moment, this Xiongnu tyrant was like a frightened bird. Prince Zhuxian's trusted aides numbered less than 2,000. Facing the 3,000 divine martial guards, he had no way of retaliating when his aura was taken away. The series of changes on this day was too exciting for the Xiongnu people. Ouyang Shua rode on azure lightning, the scarlet knight, sword glinting with a cold light. He galloped through the crowd, maximizing the effect of the killing sword. No one could stop Ouyang Shua's advance. Ring after ring of Xiongnu cavalry was pierced through like a piece of paper. Especially with the support of the rapid marching scroll, the charge of the divine martial guards was truly terrifying. The huge lances were like lightning, stabbing into the enemy's formation. If not for the strong physique of the divine martial guards, just the recoil of the lances would be enough to injure the divine martial guards. Even so, their hands and feet were numb from the impact. The Xiongnu cavalry on the other side did not have it easy. The high-speed lances were no different from the Grim Reaper, piercing through them without the slightest hindrance. Moreover, they were skewered with one thrust. Under the first charge of the divine martial guards, more than half of the Xiongnu cavalry were skewered and killed. Such a result could be said to be a miracle. Even the divine martial guards themselves could not believe it. Only Ouyang Shua's expression did not change, because he knew too well the power of this charge. Originally, he wanted to make use of this point to make a fuss. The divine martial guards threw the lances, but because there were too many corpses, they could not get rid of them. Abandon the lances. Seeing this, Wang Feng immediately made a decision. Clank! The spears, along with the corpses on them, were thrown to the ground, trampled by the warhorses. The entire battlefield instantly turned into hell. Unsheathe! Wang Feng shouted once more. Swoosh! Tang's swords flashed in unison. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, and it took less than half a minute. From this, it could be seen that the divine martial guards were well trained. The Xiongnu cavalry on the other side paled when they saw this. At this moment, Prince Wuxian would rather face Hua Tsubing than the Grim Reaper in front of him. The charge was still ongoing. The killing was far from over. The personal guards led by Ouyang Shuo were getting closer and closer to Prince Wuxian. In front of him, there was only a row of Prince Wuxian's most loyal guards. Life kill. Seeing that the blood chi on the Scarlet Knight's sword was so condensed that it was almost solid, Ouyang Shuo did not hesitate to use the sixth form of the killing sword that he had recently comprehended. The fiendish blood aura that enveloped the Scarlet Knight sword suddenly broke out of the sword, turning into red sharp blades that took away people's lives. In an instant, the dozens of Xiongnu warriors in front of Prince Wuxian all fell. The entire battlefield was silent. Prince Wuxian was so frightened that he cried out. Once the killing sword was unleashed, blood flowed like a river. No matter how experienced Prince Wuxian was, he had never seen such a shocking sword move. Ouyang Shuo smiled, and the Scarlet Knight sword slashed down without any hesitation. Before Prince Wuxian could react, his head was already floating in the air. Prince Wuxian was dead. In just one move, Ouyang Shuo had obtained 10,000 contribution points. With Prince Wuxian's death, his subordinates no longer had the will to fight. They wanted to surrender, but Ouyang Shuo was unwilling. These surrendered soldiers were of no help at all. It was better to just kill them. More importantly, seeing that the sky was getting dark, Ouyang Shuo still had to lead his troops back to the camp before it got dark. The effect of the rapid marching scroll could still last for more than 2 hours. However, the Xiongnu soldiers could not enjoy the scroll's effect. Therefore, bringing them along would only be a burden. In less than half an hour, the remaining soldiers all fell to the ground and died. As for those who escaped during the chaos, Ouyang Shuo did not have the mood to chase after them. After the battle, the divine martial guards quickly cleaned up the battlefield. The most important thing was to pick up the lances that had been abandoned during the battle. The lances that they used were carefully forged by the War Department. Each pole was worth dozens of gold coins. Ouyang Shuo used a rag to wrap Prince Wuxian's head and hung it on the back of the warhorse. After a while, Ouyang Shuo led his troops away like a gust of wind. Ouyang Shuo did not even have the mood to check the items that Prince Wuxian dropped. He hurriedly put them into his storage bag. Who would have known that the king of the Xiongnu had already fallen here? Before leaving, Ouyang Shuo was already thinking about the matter of sealing Wolf Story. There is no longer any obstruction between them and the Wolf Story Mountain. The sun set in the west. The last bit of sunset also reluctantly retreated from the horizon of the grassland. A full moon quietly climbed up the night sky. On the main battlefield, there were broken walls and ruins. It was very desolate. Under Hua Tsubing's command, the remaining Xiongnu cavalry finally surrendered unwillingly. After this battle, the elites of Prince Wuxian's troops were all lost. They could no longer pose a threat to the borders of the Great Han Dynasty. Hua Tsubing rode on his warhorse and stood on the battlefield, silently looking into the distance. It was as if he was waiting for someone to arrive. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.